small focus she seemed to shrink into herself. "You seem to be taken with my future son-in-law." His tone was a little stern, though not biting. Lord, I mean not offense." "I meant no offense." Lord." Gods, the lass was shaking. Ned had told him, Robert now only bedded whores. Not an admirable quality, but a common vice for bachelors and many a married man, but an image needed to be cultivated for all of them. So Ricard smiled at the comely girl in front of him that he was about to use. "No fear. My future son-in-law makes his own decision. And I do understand your attraction to him." Robert looked, after all, a statue of the warrior come to life. His smile thawed slightly as the trembling girl looked at him and she slowly calmed down. "And you yourself are a beauty, aren't you?" Ricard gave her behind a small slap of his own, as attentive nobles around looked on. Just as teasing as Robert. He beckoned her down to whisper in her ear, because the words did not matter to all who could see them, only the girl's reaction. "Do test him for me, though, would you? A dragon is yours if you manage to seduce him. I need to know who my daughter goes to, after all. Tell me of your success on the morrow." A smile bloomed on her face, and there was a trace of innocence left to it yet. Ricard did not feel bad though, as the girlie returned to continue her ministrations with Robert, who seemed rather perplexed at seeing her come back to him. Ricard shot him another wink as he himself rose to talk to his heir. "Son, daughter." Both Ned and Ashura gifted him honest smiles as he spoke to them, though his son's eyes flitted over to his brother in all but blood and the girl on his lap. "About that," Ricard addressed the issue immediately, "do tell Robert somehow I paid for his whore tonight, though I expect him to treat her as gently as a lady and that I will not be wroth with him. We all need to cultivate and maintain our image, though Robert does not need to know that last part." Understanding dawned in Ashura's eyes first, before it lightened up in Ned's. His son had blindness in regards to Robert Baratheon, though Ricard did not know how deep they ran. He turned to his new daughter, he had promised her after all. "Get ready to dance, you two. I will have the dance floor cleared when they strike the first tone." A tear of appreciation shined in Ashura's eyes as she understood. Ricard excused himself from his heir and daughter as he walked over to the den of the lions. Tijet noticed him approaching first, followed smoothly by Jenna. Tywine probably knew, too, yet he did not give the acknowledgement away until his brother made room for the King of Winter. "Lord Tywine," Ricard gave a nod and received one in return as he seated himself. "I was looking forward to having another chance to speak with you." "Admirable performance, Lord Ricard," the Great Lion answered. "I take it you are going for another big impression soon." "Indeed. Lord Tywine, I need to say this, I deeply admire the reigns of Castamaria. It is, I believe, the finest example of the threat of force I have ever seen." Tywine looked at him, then. "It is. Thank you. It is the first of the lessons I will impart on my daughter for her education on rule. It will be even more necessary for her if it comes to take up my mantle. A woman, she will have to prove more than I did after my father. She does not understand, yet, that the promise of violent retribution is more important for ruling than the exercise of violence itself." "True. But the way a song spreads, that is ingenious." At a sign of his hand, a common chorus started. Ricard kept his eyes on Tywine, who looked just a little surprised. The Stark and Arryn guards grew quiet, excited. Ricard did not look, but he knew Brandon turned pale. For what it was worth, he was sorry it had to be done, at least in part. The dance floor cleared, and a ring of people formed as the first melodies were only instrumental. Still, all would recognize it. The Northmen, though, along with the Valiman started chanting. "Lady Stark! Lady 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 Stark!" Ashura Dane rose, her hand clasping Eddard's, her eyes aglow with laughter. The Northmen all around looked upon her fearful, respectful, almost reverent as the quiet wolf and the laughing star took to the dance floor. The rest of the guests grew quiet as well, and confused. And once again, Ricard saw his son dance with his love. Floating like on a cloud, a swirl of purple and white and silver grey turned round and round the laid out planks, as none could deny the spark in their eyes. They were a vision. Jenna looked on in astonishment. His son moved as smoothly in dance as he did in the yard in leather. Asherah was passion and movement and the wind. After the instrumental first stanza finished, Brandon was pushed to the fore, and he had to sing to the melody of the Dornishman's wife like he'd had to since Ned and his fiancée penned their own lyrics for it. The fair Dornish maid shined as bright as a star and her hair flowed free as she danced. The quiet wolf saw her and they fell in love and they danced through the night, both entranced. Brandon was not the best singer. It did not matter. His heir loved his lady, and his eldest could never stand to inherit. A song to spread the tale. Tywine looked more sharp than controlled now, attentive and dangerous. As the Dornish maid with her quiet wolf danced the wolf's brother, a wild one, observed. Jealous was he, and he wanted her, too so he plotted to take what he craved. Ricard left his eye to take in the other attendants for a second. Shella went and her daughter had fans up, hiding their faces. A few reachmen hummed along, rather than sing along with old lyrics. Some Valiman had joined the northern guards in their circle, as had the small folk and men of the Reach. Robert did not pay attention to Bessie on his lap, his eyes aglow in fondness and yearning as he looked at his foster brother. Alistair Florent looked thoughtful, as did Baylor Hightower and Titos Blackwood. They grasped the possible intent, what would happen if the new version of the song spread. He begged her to visit, to help with his brother and when she came to his lair, he pounced. Tried to force her, to have her, but the maid escaped to his brother by whom he was trounced. The lyrics might not have been high literature, but they were easy and they had romance and crime and were just a little bit bawdy. The Cregan's men were already spreading it in the inns to the east. Ned and Ash did not think on all that, though, as Ricard saw them in their own world. As all saw them in their own world. The gossip would grow, but all saw the truth in the eyes of the quiet wolf and his smiling star. The wild wolf raged, lied on the maid's honor and tried to besmirch her for life. But his brother saw through him and his vile lies and now the maid'll be the quiet wolf's wife. And it all ended happily ever after. The Dornish would claim the lyrics with a vengeance, the original a thorn in their ears. On the last note, Ned lowered his Dornish maid into a low dip, before pulling her up in a deep kiss. The women of the small folk around the pair seemed only infected by the pair's happiness. Ricard heard Robert laughing again, all the while as Ned and Asherah returned to the table, and Bessie shared a beautiful smile. Brandon slinked away. The girl he had smiled at earlier did not look at him any longer. Ricard would seek him out, later, and sit by him as he helped him drown in alcohol for the night. Impressive, a familiar tune, well liked and known everywhere. Less solemn, too, I believe you have taken measures to see the new lyrics spread. Tywine Lannister looked at him, and like always there was a mix of respect and ambition in the look they shared. And more. Of course, Lord Tywine. Can I leave the singers in the Westerlands for you to take care of? You have proven you know how to make them sing the proper tunes. You can, Lord Ricard. We are to be kin soon, after all. Kin help each other. On that note, I have a warning for you, I will be making a move soon. I will be expecting it, Lord Tywine. Any advice you care to share? There was the moment, the beat of the butterfly's wings, and Ricard saw Tywine make a decision. The man picked up his golden cup of Dornish red, his colors in his hands and sipped it before he spoke. What do you do, when you have finished the climb, and you find yourself at the peak, only to see there is only limited space, and everyone behind you trying to escape the pit as they ascend the ladder will try to take your place in the sun from you? Ricard looked at him, and thought his answer. Then his second answer, the one he and Tywine would both agree on, and so he spoke. You hold the peak. You destroy the ladder, and let all that seek to take the peak from you to fall back into the pit below. You deny them the climb. Tywine looked at him, calculating and controlled and just a little fond, before he spoke on. So one does. And we have agreed to hold the peak as kin, have we not? I would ask you to send my daughter's betrothed for the rock in, let's say, 6 moons from now. You will hear of the first ripples by then of what I will have wrought by then. Ricard held his gaze. With the Lord of Casterly Rock, all moments were linchpin in a game of balances, trust and respect and ambition. For men like them, these usually stood in opposition. Sometimes, an offered hand was required. I will be sending Benjamin in 2 moons' time. I would ask you to let him visit shortly in about 7 moons though, he will become an uncle. Not a dangerous admission at all, but a sign of limited trust. Young blood. And now the maid'll be the quiet wolf's wife, Tywine said a little dryly, though Ricard saw Jenna smile a little. Agreed, my lord. My daughter will visit Winterfell with him, along with an honor guard then. My advice to you, Lord Ricard, is this: hold on to your moons and stags. The Lion of the Rock inclined his head once, and did not offer more as they said their goodbyes. For once Ricard was not sure what to make of Tywine's words, though he would be a fool to dismiss the Lannisters' warning. Especially as there seemed no drawbacks to him, the Marndalis would even thank him for it. Ricard once more told his guests, laughing with Robert, drinking with the Northmen, the Ironborn and the small folk, bumbling his etiquette along the Reachman and sharing a few words with the Riverlords and Valyman, before retreating to search out his eldest. Brandon had retreated to his room, 3 empty wine bottles already around him. Strong Dornish red. A little was splattered on the floor, and it looked like blood. Ricard brought another 2 as he entered. They started drinking in silence first, before they started talking. They talked of Ned, and of Ashura. Of the North, of King's Landing. Of the Dustins, and the Barrows. Of Lyra and Barbary. Of girls and women they'd sought out, before and after. You know, the girl earlier, with the shy smile. Brandon all but slurred the words as he spoke. She wouldn't look at me no more. And I saw her beautiful, father. I saw her beautiful. I had lost that, before. When all girls flocked to me, I saw them pretty. She was the only one tonight, and she was beautiful. And then she looked at me no more. And despite a slight haze, despite the fact that Ricard almost did not think on his son's words as he was just tipsy enough, Ricard sobered at the comment. And Ricard felt fear. Notes. It's #Ricard in a roll again. I could not help myself. Part 3 of 4 of the Pit and Ladder chapters. Next one will have more factions again, yeah. Adorable Rhaenys is adorable. Furthermore. Also adorable Maya is also adorable. About the title and subtitle. For the whole Pit and Ladder arc, in each POV the title of the chapter is name-dropped at least once. But I knew how I was going to end this moment, and the subtitle quote just fits Brandon's drunken talk to a T. So, I had to have myself a subtitle. Tell me if you recognize the scene where Eddard says out of the mouths of babes, it's one of the pivotal moments in a Game of Thrones. Also, please do leave a comment on Robert's entry to the story proper and your thoughts on Brandon's confession. Finally, the next chapter is completely storyboarded. I do not have a word written of it, and it might take more than a week to be penned. I have a title to tease you with, though. This is what it's going to be called. Chaos. Chapter 18, Chaos to the South. Notes. Some people see chaos as a pit. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. She met the starry Septon himself, descending the very same steps she was walking up to speak with her father. The portly man walked with that grace practiced preachers had to them, the acquired kind, not the natural one. His dress consisted of the typical robes of cloth of gold and the crystalline circlet on his brow beautiful, delicate and elaborate. Completing his outfit was his ever-present kind, grandfatherly smile. The word humble could not be farther a descriptive word in her mind at the sight. Still she curtsied politely as she made room for him and the man passed her. Malara looked after him for a second. The starry Septon rarely sought out her father on his own, and if he did, he was received on the ground floor. All of Westeros did not follow convention anymore though, it seemed. Not just the people, Malara knew. That was also the reason Malara entered Lytton Hightower's quarters. Not matters of faith, or maybe they were. Malara did not care a whit for the 7-point star ever since Sweet Jane was the first to claim her lips, and her studies set her father apart the more she learned. Still, it always served to know of the movements of the important Septons. Malara herself did not generally regard the Septons' assembly as nice bedfellows and knew the sentiment was returned in kind, largely due to her reputation. If the Septons knew the truth of her, Malara was quite certain the general disdain would turn particular. However, her house was deeply entrenched with both the citadel and the starry September, more so since Alicent's reign. House Hightower would never be able to escape the shackles the Queen in chains had fettered them in, forever to remain in their station after the folly of Otto Hightower and his daughter. Standing quietly in the entrance, Malara watched as her father kneaded his forehead in thought. She knew the Lord Hightower would impart important information as he saw fit. She was his favorite, and she knew how he valued her opinion. Still, she did not expect the words that finally came forth from her father's lips. It seemed her own matter would have to wait. There is a new jape circulating in the capital. Queen Rolla has turned most devout. The King's Court finds it laughable that the Queen makes the walk to the Great September daily to pray. Malara had only kept little abreast with information on the Queen. Even before Duskendale she had little influence in court. She knew her basic profile, of course. However, she did not understand the almost pained look creasing her father's brow. When she answered, Malara urged her father for more information, to see the bigger picture. It does seem curious, father. After all, it is widely known that the High Septon is one of the few people in Aes in a circle of sycophants. Our king believes, after all, he has the man to thank for the birth of his favorite son. Queen Rolla has not been known to be particularly pious since. Malara was old enough to remember the expectations people had of the Queen before she retreated into the confines of the palace. Those used to belong more to the political part of Targaryen rule, not the clerical aspects. All ruined, within a few years of being Aerys' sister wife, relegated to a position of no import at court. Lytton Hightower looked at his daughter in contemplation before picking up where he left off. That is true, but nowadays one is not often in danger of meeting the High Septon in his rightful seat of power. A disconnect has developed between the voice of the Seven on Earth and his followers in King's Landing since the Queen has birthed a second son. The shepherd of the faithful has proven himself to be more sheep himself. Now the Queen marches into the Great September and prays with septons of power to the gods. She prays to all the seven. Just a little did Malara feel herself tumble at the words. To all seven. She hated how haltingly the sound of her voice came out. Even to the stranger. Even to the stranger. Her father's answer was most solemn. Prayers to the stranger were either prayers for death or, for people in the know, secluded talks with the movers and shakers of the clergy. But Targaryens rarely banded with septons that did not wear the crystal crown. They had taken too much care to neuter the political arm of the faith to risk involving them again. Officially, of course. How do you know, father? Septons at the Great September hail from all over the country. The high clergy in each of the centers of the faith know roughly what happens in the sanctums of the other big septs. I do believe Olenna Tyrell will be approached by a septon herself, as will the Martells and the Arryns. Or Lady Waynwood, in case of the Arry. It is one of the few aspects of the game where the Great Lion cannot meddle, for he has alienated both players and pawns. Still, the Starry September has the deepest roots if a new fight for dominance of the faith breaks out. Does it really look that bleak? The king is burning people, Malara, and the High Septon remains quiet. The most devout conspire with the Queen in unseen corners of the September. No one dares to look, but nobody knows what about. You know Old Town still resents Baylor for moving the seat of the High Septon to the capital. How he made the office itself more reliant on royal support, even if the idiot probably did not think thus in his delusions. The Starry September expects worse than a struggle for dominance, though. They expect the faith to fracture into separate sects. The Starry Septon approached me today for support in case of this, to help re-establish Old Town as the center of the faith in the reach over Highgarden. He knows Olenna will try for every advantage in her precarious position right now and use up her pet septon. However, the Starry Septon is a fool and he is grossly misjudging my priorities if he believes my starting gamble will be for dominance in a smaller splinter of the faith. We need the faith to remain united throughout Westeros. Malara looked at her father uncertain. Her own relationship with septons throughout her life left her with a lot of prejudice. She knew, however, she was of the firm belief that a disunited faith would be a boon to the nobles throughout the Seven Kingdoms. The Starry September would be more reliant on the High Tower and truthfully, Highgarden would not be able to usurp Old Town as the center of the faith in the Reach. But her father was worried. There was more to this than she knew. She only had to ask. Would we not come out ahead if the faith fractured? The starry September will probably become the dominant clerical center for the Reach, the Westerlands and a part of the Riverlands and the Stormlands, all the while the clergy itself would be weakened against our influence due to their diminished prestige. Her father laughed, but it was a hollow thing. He poured himself a cup of Dornish strong wine, a vice he hid from his fellow Reachers, and drained the red in one go before rising his word again. It will take but 2 generations, I am sure, until at least the Arryns will refound the swords and the stars. Their line holds the most sway over the faithful through blood alone. Combine that with a more conservative mindset of their flock and the threat of heathen clansmen, and the faith militant will seem a sensible solution in the Vale. Sunspear will separate entirely from King's Landing and Old Town. Their allegiance to the High Septon has been lip service even before Nymeria landed in Dorne. And then both King's Landing and Old Town will have to follow with their own chapters if we do not want to see ourselves outnumbered. There are no dragons to cow the Septons into submission anymore. What do you think the other big houses and septs will do? A blunt question, but her father liked those usually. Malara though did not like the answering sigh, and the words that followed even less. I do not know, Malara. There have been little birds, recently, that sang to me. It made me wary. The spider has approached me and the starry September, to warn us of an unpredictable queen going rogue. Insinuations about the faith militant were made, even, and no one is certain where Roller's loyalties lie now. Lytton Hightower breathed out again, long and flat before continuing. Of course it was all framed carefully and it included valuable information, but the Eunuch's motives are suspect. I do not think he has enough of an insight yet into the strings between the faith and the highborn. Still, the spider has never moved so sloppily before. Something has him frantic, and that in itself is worthy of concern. The Targaryens will lose the Lord's allegiance as soon as they allow a centralized religious order in Westeros to be re-established. The North and the Iron Islands would secede from the crown immediately and Dorne would follow in short order. Afterwards rebellions would run rampant and at least Tywin Lannister would split as well. I do not understand why the spymaster of the king is telling such a bold lie that would set the lords against the crown. It does not make sense. You know, Father Malara started, Olenna once cautioned me against ever underestimating Rolla Targaryen just because she has retreated from the game herself. I have lapsed in that. But as you say, there is no way in all of the 7 hells that the re-establishment of the faith militant would ever be a considerable option for our Targaryen queen. Even our king would find his throat slit if he crossed that breaking point, and as you said, he's burning people already. Varys is either compromised or we will finally see what his cards are in the Game of Thrones. That's a positive, isn't it? In a matter of speaking, yes, Lytton Hightower replied with half-closed eyes and a deep-set frown, only that it is now to be suspected that Varys is the agent of an Essozi faction and is trying to intensify the coming war. During the dance the Triarchy's fleet was only defeated thanks to dragons. Those are gone, still no Essozi party would stand to extract gains from Westeros as long as it stands united. Varys is reacting too fast to all these developments. The wedding that never was has only been 2 weeks ago, yet Spider is already stirring the pot. Either he has been working to destabilize the crown ever since he came into Air's service to incite a maximum amount of chaos, or he has been actively working towards a civil war. Either option is terrible. The only thing we know for sure is that the crown's intelligence is severely compromised, both on Aerys and on Rhaegar's side. Malara did not know how to reply to that. However, as horrible as all the news were, Malara knew her own message might prove to carry consequences reaching even farther. Father, I need to join the ships going east. Malara did not mince words with the Lord of the High Tower. She never did, not with her father nor anyone else. Lytton Hightower might have been startled by the sudden shift in topics, Malara could not tell. Quickly a small smile spread across his face. What has you so interested in Essos suddenly, daughter? Her father seemed bemused as ever at his daughter's candidness, even as it scared suitors away left and right. It did not matter to him, for he had enough other daughters to play as beautiful ladies and to marry lords and heirs dutifully. Academic curiosity. Malara knew there was a smile on her lips as well as she spoke, but Lytton Hightower was one of the few people she could truly be herself around. There were scant few of those. Her father did reward her with his rumbling chuckle. Even though Malara knew she was the favorite daughter, all of Lytton's children had been spoiled by his kindness, all 10 of them. Come now. Does Marwyn not manage to keep your attention anymore with the wonders he has here? Actually, Malara replied, those wonders are the reason both he and I plan to travel east. You know the glass candles in the citadel have shattered. A report from the wall has us concerned. We believe we might find out more at the place where magic is still felt most keenly as to why that happened, and if it occurred across all of Planetos. It had happened over a fortnight ago and for the first time in years had brought attention again to the most discredited subject of study in the citadel. The glass candles were the only tangible magical object the bulk of the students ever came in contact with. Obviously it would create an uproar if the ancient workings just imploded. Her father observed Malara in thought for just a second before answering. Karth. No, Ashai. You mean to go to Ashai by the shadow? She'd had her father's attention the moment she'd entered, but now Malara was scrutinized intensely by Lytton Hightower. Yes, father. First to Karth, then further to Ashai. Why? The most difficult question, yet Malara did not believe her father would understand her answer in its entirety. Or its seriousness. You are aware of the theory Marwyn and I developed in our studies. Malara smiled at the fondly as she asked the question. Her father did indulge her in her masquerade as an acolyte of the higher mysteries. It was the only section of the citadel tolerant enough towards a student's need for privacy that they even let the odd disguised girl in. They were really starved for students, after all. Still, for a noble woman of the highest stock to mix in was a rarity. The theory that magic is not truly dead, her father answered slowly, merely dormant. That's the one. Malara had to gulp down the emptiness as she spoke on, the thought alone of her life's work so far leaving her trembling a little. Her father did not answer, but his gaze sharpened. There were old records hidden in the high tower, usually only passed on from one lord to the next, but her father had given Malara the key to all of the old libraries. Alchemy and shadow binding, spells and necromancy, the aeromancy and prophecy. The high towers of old were well versed in sorcery of all kinds. The high tower itself was structurally unsound. There was no way to build something as tall as it should. It should have been impossible. Yet just like the wall it stood, the foundation standing on unknown bedrock and unknown magic. Just another reason her next words scared Malara so. Marwyn and I fear that magic is either waking up now, or truly dying. The next day mad made Malara and Marwyn the Midge stood on the prow of the earliest ship leaving for Essos. It had taken 2 moons after that fateful meeting for Melorio to actually leave Sunspear. Oberyn had not been understanding of the procedure to let Melorio's kin in Norphos know of her visit in a manner that Melorio knew the bearded priests to intercept and understand the message was meant for them just as well. Then again, her brother-in-law had been rather outraged that all correspondence and communication into and out of her home city was vetted and copied by the clergy. He was a petulant child at times, and in Melorio's eyes too indulgent a father by far. Doran had supported her way of doing things, though, so the matter was settled quickly. Oberyn had left her soon after for Euronwood, to face Ormond Euronwood in a duel of honor and head further north after. Even the fight itself was already finished. Oberyn had disarmed his adversary and forced to surrender, his spear as clean as his sword had been in the fight against Ormond's father. The Lord of Euronwood now believed the younger of the Martell brothers' proclamation of innocence. Especially seeing that the man's sword itself had been dipped in poison. Yet he had only nicked a finger and cut a shallow wound into Oberyn's leg. Her brother-in-law had cut off his own left pinky at the dueling site when he noticed the discoloration spreading. The other wound was inflicted in the maneuver that saw Oberyn win the fight, and Lord Euronwood did provide the antidote after he submitted. More than a moon before Melorio's departure, a letter had reached Doran from Dragonstone, where Oberyn met his sister before traveling on north for the wedding of Eddard Stark and Ashura Dane. Melorio remembered the pair from that ill-fated tourney. The last she knew of was the travesty the older Stark brother had committed, and she could not imagine herself returning to the family of such a man. All she knew of Eddard Stark now, though, left her with an ever-nagging curiosity. Apparently Oberyn could not wait to meet Ashura and her husband to be either. A few letters in Elia's possession from Eddard Stark's hand had convinced her brother-in-law that the new heir to the north was the greatest wordsmith in West Eos alive. The poetry samples he had included even convinced Oberyn to take etiquette lessons in hopes of someday finding her own Prince Charming. The text Doran read only to Melorio a fortnight ago spurred them to a night of sensual debauchery she would never forget. As a result, However, Melorio dreaded ever meeting Eddard Stark in person. Still now the memories left her blushing at times. Melorio knew the quiet wolf to be a seducer beyond compare. She would have to watch out that Quentin did not take after his uncle and husband of his aunt's sister in all but blood. Her little boy looked up at her as she contemplated his future and nestled into her breast again. Tioche was already in sight of them, a mere 10 days after setting off from Sunspear. The ship they travelled on was to resemble a merchant vessel. They would part with the captain in Pentos and follow the roads to Norphos from there. Their ship moored at the docks of the merchant's harbour, separate from the slavers' harbour that lay further out in squalor. One of the few things Melorio missed from Essos, though she despised the Tiroshi way of slavery. In Norphos slaves were bred, not captured. They were not broken in the way of slavers' bay, nor were they ripped from their lands by Tiroshi or Dothraki. No, Norvosi slaves knew their station growing up and were not given a reason to fear or hate their masters. No, they loved the hand that fed them. Some of the servants in Sunspear would benefit from proper training. Melorio fixed a wig of blue to her scalp. One of the few reasons she liked Tioche was the chance to indulge with her more uncommon hair pieces. Another reason was their honey fingers. Dornish cuisine included some marvelous sweets of nuts and dough, yet the Tiroshi treat was one of the few luxuries Doran imported for Melorio. Melorio of Norphos disembarked with her son in a sling at her breast and Ario hotter in her wake. Her guard had taken to growing his beard in Westeros and apparently grown attached, telling her in confidence he would not shave before Norphos was a day's ride away. Doran would not understand the sense of freedom Melorio and Ario shared under his roof. She herself, while still keeping to her wigs, had let her natural hair grow onto her shoulder. She would miss it when she entered the city of her forefathers. Soon enough Melorio found herself in a nice eatery at the waterfront with delighting in honey fingers, allowing Ario to indulge with her while some of her household guards kept watch. It was surprising, therefore, when one of her guards stepped up to Melorio to inform her there were 2 men that wanted to speak with her regarding her journey. Few people were supposed to know Melorio even left Dorne. For all intents and purposes she had retreated to the water gardens with her young son and Arianne. The 2 strangers divested themselves of all weapons on her requests, even allowing for Ario to check for hidden weapons before taking a seat at her table. One seemed to be around 5 and 20, the other looked no older than 7 and 10. Both looked to be soldiers, though Tioche only kept sellswords. The elder had a long mane of blonde hair and a carefully groomed moustache, both oiled to perfection just for that extra shine. Melorio approved of the care that went into it. The man was projecting a commanding presence with his well-sculpted body. His partner looked leaner and harder, less jovial, with cropped black hair and earthen eyes. The weapons they left behind was a monstrosity of a bow for the elder along with a quality sword and well-maintained sword and shield for the younger. "Greetings, my lady of Norphos and Dorne," the elder spoke as his companion remained observant. "Allow me to introduce myself and my companion. I am Sir Wendell Marndaly and this is Robin Flint. We are the captain and deputy of the Wolfpack chapter in Tioche. Our employer reached out to us about 2 moons back that you might be passing through these waters and that we were to give advice regarding your route to your home city." Melorio noticed Ario tense as the man spoke while she tried to connect the man's house to its origin. She did not know of a noble house by the name Flint, yet she remembered Marndaly after a second. "You are a long way from White Harbor," Sir Melorio finally said, "yet I must apologize for I do not know either your company nor your friend's noble house." A kind smile played on her lips as she waited for an answer. Robin Flint spoke first, his voice gruff with an accent more pronounced with harsh northern tones. "Few bother. I come from further north than White Harbor, though my father wants me to rule to the west," he said. Wendell Marndaly shot him a look as that was apparently that, before Wendell started to speak himself. "My good friend's mother is a Flint from Widow's Watch, while his father is a Flint from Flint's Finger. Don't bother my lady, there's still more families named Flint in the north. Few to the south know northern houses, and a little we like it that way. Still, more importantly, our employer advises you to travel via Myr if your destination is Norphos and avoid Pentos. Luckily more and more companies are following the call to Qohor, you can join one of them in Myr." Ario gripped his long aches and only stilled as Melorio raised a hand before she took a second to take in the men before her. "Forgive me, sir, I once again must profess I do not know much of the Wolfpack." The Marndaly man was quick to pick up, luckily. A young company, in a manner of speaking, around 30 years older than the Golden Company. After the Dance of Dragons, a band of Northmen started the wolf pack in Essos to avoid returning to a land in the throes of winter. Still, contacts were upheld with the families and many a Northman earned their spurs in our pack since. We have recruitment chapter in all the 3 daughters. Melorio left her hand raised and Ario kept his fingers on his long aches still. And your employer? As I said, my lady, family ties. The fake smile on Wendell Mondale's face told her she was not going to get more out of him. Ricard Stark was a good bet and Melorio could not divine any other Northron with vested interest in Dawn's quest for allies. And why do you advise avoiding Pentos, good sir? All I was told, my lady, Wendell answered slowly, is that you will narrow the possibility of Iliomapatis finding out about your movements should you travel from Myr. Melorio had never heard the name. So she left her hand up. Iliomapatis is the man that funded Varys' little birds in West Eos. Robin Flint said after a second from Wendell Mondale's side. He did not have an accent as he spoke this time. Wendell Mondale did not move a muscle in his face, but still it looked like his fake smile grew. Melorio lowered her hand slowly as she thought on the conversation thus far before turning to Robin Flint. Family ties, Captain. There was a hard grin to his face as the dark-haired man answered. My grandaunt, Arya Flint. The mother-in-law of Ricard Stark. Melorio inclined her head in thanks. So the old wolf anticipated Doran's moves. She'd need to send a message. Arya relaxed at her side. Thank you, Captain, sir. Send my greetings to your employer and thank Ricard Stark from the Martells. But do tell, why are more and more companies heading for Qohor? Wendell Mondale jumped in again. There is a call going around for a punitive campaign against the Dothraki, and Qohor is paying in gold. Lots of gold. Madness. Rank madness. What folly would lead the Qohori to battle the Dothraki once more? Her thoughts must have shown on her face, for Wendell Mondale spoke on. Akul's Echo has been singling out Qohor and returns every few years to claim bounty. Already the Windblown, the Maiden's Men and the Cats have arrived at the city. We know the Bright Banners have broken camp to once more face a Khalasar for Qohor. Others like the Gallant Men and the Long Lances have also signed on. More companies take ships north. The Storakraus and the Stormbreakers, the Free Company and the Ragged Standard, the Iron Shields and the Men of Valor and many more have taken off. It's kept mostly quiet, but I can tell you some of them are headed for Sarth. Melorio felt herself swallow, her throat dry. Sarth. Sonya. By the shrouded god. Doran needed to be told. The conflict was to grow beyond their wildest predictions. Central Essos was bound to erupt in chaos if this information was true. Where did Sarth get the coin? Were they really in charge? Another thing gnawed on Melorio, she had to ask. No way around it. Please have them go east, too. What of the Golden Company? Oh, they are camped at Myr. They are under contract already. Nobody knows who they are contracted to, though. Another friendly advice, Lady Melorio. Avoid their encampment as well. Their current leader had kin in the Kingswood Brotherhood. Maybe he was able to combine business and personal matters. It would explain why he is not following the easy money right now. Wendell Mondale was almost jovial as he spoke of the Golden Company. The North had enmity with the Crown, after all, and the Golden Company was founded on the tenets of bringing the Targaryens down. Mondale's reply offered up another question, though, so Melorio turned to Captain Flint. Is it the same for you, Captain? You would be in the field already if the wolf pack was following the easy money, wouldn't you? Are you combining business and pleasure? What has Ricard Stark offered you? The grin to Robin Flint's face reached his eyes now, but it stayed just as hard. My lady, I'm afraid business is calling for me again. To answer your question, my business days are done, now it's just pleasure and family obligations. We will see ourselves out. The chairs scraped over the floor with a discordant screech as Robin Flint and his deputy rose. At the door the razor-eyed captain turned once more to say his goodbyes. Lady Melorio, I wish you safe travels to Norphos. I will extend your greetings to my employer and send Ricard Stark your thanks. On that note, Do you also want me to send your thanks to my employer and greetings to Ricard Stark? Mellerio sat there staring. It took a moment to sink in. The two Northmen did not wait for her reply. Mellerio remained stock still a little longer. Only when Quentin woke did she focus again. She did not know if her journey's start was fortunate or the opposite. However, Doran would need to be informed of the breadth of new information. The sellsword companies. Qohor. Sarth. The Dothraki. Ricard Stark and whoever his confidant in Essos was, their far-reaching influence and intelligence. Iloioma Patis. The Golden Company. Her altered travel route. Bringing Norphos to their side had become just that more important. 3 days later Mellerio set off for Myr as more and more questions plagued her. There was only one thing she knew now, though. Doran's predictions were off. Way off. Everything was going to be worse. Notes. The Chaos chapter stands at 20,000 plus words. That's about a fifth of this entire story. Fuck me. Therefore, I've decided to just split this chapter into retroactively into 4 parts. Don't worry if you read the original Behemoth, I did not change a word. I only altered the quotes in the front notes. If you commented on the original post you can find your comment at the bottom of the 4th Chaos chapter. I was loath to split the chapter when I first posted it because, just as Pit and Ladder, I was sticking to 6 sequence part per chapter. However, this split according to character location makes Chaos more easily digestible. It even keeps the POVs in sequence, which of course was of utmost importance to me. Also, I'm splitting the post-chapter notes. Now the important stuff, anachronisms. As I've taken some time for research and world building in this story, I've been looking for points where I have deviated from canon in points that should have happened before Ricard reached the capital, or would jumble with the timeline of characters. I have found 3 and see it as my duty to list them, as it is my intention to remain as close to canon until the point of deviation as possible. If you know any other points where I am wrong canon-wise, I'd welcome a comment about it, and FYI, no, a romantic Lyanna/Roriga pairing is not canon. Obviously, Ricard in the original did not travel from Riverrun to KL but straight from the north. This one does not bother me much, actually. Oberyn should not be in Westeros. You saw him in the first Mellerio chapter, and heard of him in this one, but according to canon he was in Essos during all of Robert's rebellion. This one miffs me a little. In canon, Quayen's Piper wife is still alive in 283 AC. She reattaches the fingers to the hand of Pike's Maester after Balon cuts them off. In my story she's dead and soon replaced by Shella as wife of Quayen. Don't worry, her son and the Maester are still in the story, not sure if they'll play a large role, if at all. Chapter 19, Chaos to the East. Notes. Some see Chaos as a ladder. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Grace sat contemplating the figures of the last moon, noting another windfall, another high increase in goods sold. Her vault had grown once more, as had her inventory. Not only did she earn almost another shipload of gold, she'd also been able to shore up on sharp steel again. The price for good arms had been dropping for moons now. It did not make any sense. Most slave companies had made their way north to Qohor since the call went out for war on Kolzeko 6 moons past. Yet there were more weapons and new slaves available for cheap now, despite the steep demands for both of them. Everyone was buying in bulk, what with the prices so low. 3 goods had been flooding the market recently, so Grace had taken notice. More slaves had been dropped with the high tide today again. Few unsullied came in for purchase, of course, but if Grace remembered the numbers correctly from her training in Yunkai, the city's enslavers Bay should start running low on common pit slaves in another 3 moons, as well as slaves of other stock. The masters would need the Dothraki to win in Qohor and return south quickly for their supplies to stabilize again. It was distasteful, the woman who was once named Blossom knew. She felt her cheeks ache again, the tear-shaped scars burning. But it helped. Fresh slaves, cheap arms. Many companies on their way north were chasing the easy money, taking many tested and broken slave soldiers with them. The newer ones tended to be unrulier now since the last full moon, showing they'd only been freshly caught. It was all a little suspect. The slaves were too cheap. The price for penned people had dropped too low. Volantis looked to soon have 7 slaves per free man, not just 5 anymore. And yet the old blood was richer than before. The merchants, too. And not just a little richer. Grace had seen her gold more than double in the last 6 moons. She'd managed to buy a lot of people, and set them free the last week again. Sales went incredibly well, too. The old blood was selling off property in bulk. Most shipyards had sold all their vessels, and a group of foreigners were paying premium for produce and luxury. The luxury goods were shipped off, but it had become obvious that someone was stocking up food in the warehouses by the harbor. It was usually a difficult market to break into, but by the amount these people were spending they were likely in control of almost 2/3 of all the food in Volantis already. Already they must be running terrible losses. The strangest part was they were giving it out in large amounts as alms for the poor daily. They had taken the charity away from the Red Temple, distributing cheap meals from their warehouses, whereas the priests of Arla had not given out free food for 2 moons now. The Red Priests had been silent since their vision ceased 7 moons ago, too. A shame, seeing as the people were now turning away from Arla slowly. And the new High Priest, Ben-Ero, had been so promising since he rose to his office a decade ago now. The man was a gifted speaker and had been receptive to her cause. Maybe their revolution could have started already with the new influx in slaves and arms, and with the departure of most Volanten slave soldiers beholden to the old blood. If only her husband was still alive. Regardless, she was to meet with the light of wisdom today. Grace was of the opinion Flame of Truth was not an apt title for Ben-Ero now, seeing that Arla did not guide his flock through darkness and terror anymore. Of course that knowledge was kept from the majority of the followers, though Grace did notice the rumor spreading for some time now even amongst the lowest slaves. The bald, almost sickly thin man came by an hour before she was done with her inventory, a mistake he had never done when he still saw visions in his flames. High Priest, she greeted him as he was led into her parlor. I was most surprised when I received your missive yesterday asking for a meeting. It indicated there was an internal problem in your church. Why are you here to bother me with cleaning your house? The man stared at her, zealotry burning in his eyes like the flame tattoos covering his face, before he made to speak. Ben-Ero obviously did not like to be left standing as Grace finished business before deigning to talk to him. He disliked her brusque confrontation even more. Too bad he did not have the clout anymore to demand her immediate attention. Yes, Lady Grace. We need your help. 2 of the Fiery Hand have disappeared in the last week. It is most disturbing, since we know neither the followers of the goat nor the heretics of the stars are responsible. Nobody knows where they disappeared to, they simply did not return from their patrols. All of them went missing somewhere in the slums, and you have the best eyes and ears in those quarters. Blossom's old skills helped put a masking smile on Grace's face, even as she seethed internally in fury. Counting cattle. A slave he may be himself, but Ben-Ero saw himself above others shackled. He did not see them as his sworn brothers, bound to the same masters. Grace doubted the man ever saw the shadow of the leash or heard the echo of the whip. He would not count his brothers and sisters by score if he had. It was a problem with temple slaves, they did not know despair. They knew purpose and certainty and faith. Grace could not think of more broken slaves, except the pleasure slaves living in the shade. But at least blue lips were not an infection, not the way dogma was. It was not a point to fight over, as Ben-Ero knew she would help. Grace had to. The Fiery Hand was bound like she had been, and if slaves disappeared in her backyard, Grace would get her answers and find the culprit. Do you know who else has a motive to seek quarrel with you? You might not feed the bellies of the poor anymore, but they still remember you fondly. Most would help you in your search. 40 men is not a small number, and the Fiery Hand is too recognizable to miss. Ben-Ero almost scowled at Grace's question. The loss of prestige in the slums had hurt the Red Priests deeply, the bulk of their followers came from there. Ben-Ero should count himself lucky that it was only a band of merchants giving out free food. If it was another church there'd be open fighting in the streets, and wars of the faiths did not tend to end. They only lost the people's stomachs, not the people's souls. A few crime lords have disagreements with us, but they would not risk antagonizing us in such a way. The flames are still silent. It cannot be a major problem, else Arla would guide us. He spoke with such conviction. The mob probably ate every mouth from his lips, breathed it. But Grace knew. There were stirrings to the east. In Karth the balance of the powers had been broken. The House of the Undying had stopped receiving visitors, and the healers of the Lazarene saw more people die than live nowadays. She knew it would incense the man across from her, but when her brothers and sisters were in danger, Grace did not have a care for Ben Aro's sensibilities. The power of your magic has been ebbing recently, or has it already dried out? Do not take your lack of answers for an isolated problem. The warlocks have been silent as of late, and the few news I have of Ashai have me shivering. Ben Aro, tell me which crime lords you've had disagreements with. I will not stand here and listen to you blaspheme the one true God by comparing his miracles to the parlor tricks of charlatans. Ben Aro's voice was thunderous as he raged. I should not have come to you, for I thought you a believer in our cause. It is sad to see you are truly nothing more than Vogaro's whore, clinging to the last vestiges of his wealth. Grace had to take a deep breath, closing her eyes at the appellation. Her guards, Luzon and Cebu, entered immediately as they heard the screams. They looked as angry as Grace felt. The widow of the waterfront did not stop the two as they grabbed the high priest and pushed him from the chair to his knees, though she gave them hold when Cebu made to pull his scimitar. Listen here, you little cur. Grace had few triggers left, but you better not touch those with even a feather. I have entertained you because our cause aligned in so far as giving the people freedom from their earthly master. But that is where we part. I want to see every slave a free man. I do not care if they style themselves as slaves of Arla after, but I mean to give them a choice first. Even your priests, even your servants, even your guards in the fiery hand, as far as the lowliest temple prostitute you keep in the temple of the Lord of Light. I do not care for your sympathy. I do not care for your respect. I do not care for you, Ben Aro, and as fellow slaves you could not be lower in my eyes. You will never again take the name of my husband onto your tongue, or I will see it torn out. Your own priests will tear you apart if you cannot be the Arla's voice to the people anymore. So you should better care for what you say in the future, for it may be your last words. Now, do tell. Which of my competitors has quarrels with the priests of the Lord of Light? Ben Aro seemed to want to interrupt her in the middle, but the grip of Luzon on his shoulder kept him quiet. He was not stupid, after all, only frenzied in his faith. When he spoke again, his voice was back under his control. The fourth yearling. The father of orphans. The slumdog keeper. The prince of knives. Except for these four, no crime lord has any major conflicts of interest with the Red Temple. Grace, the widow of the waterfront, thought about which of her four competitors was the most likely to strike out into burning coals after only a few moons of weakness. She owned the slumdog keeper and had him taking out slavers that were going to sell their shackled to the different faiths. She had given him orders not to mess with established religious militias. Either he followed her orders or he'd need to be replaced. The father of orphans was on friendly terms with her, with most anyone in Volantis underbelly actually, dealing only in information, pickpocketing and beggary. He did right by the strays he collected, and some of those strays he freed from their former chains, but he did not have the men that could make patrols of the Fiery Hand disappear. The fourth yearling did little business in the poorer districts of Volantis. Even if Grace did not know his name, she was sure he was a freeborn of noble blood. His territory was the old city and none of his agents could take out guard patrols in the slums unobserved. Grace knew his racketeering schemes had recently lessened for an unknown cause, but whatever he was hired for was definitely not an operation on this side of the Long Bridge. The Prince of Knives was the most likely subject. His assassination squads had at times been thwarted in their hits by prophecies from the flames. However, he was too much of a professional to hunt for members of the Fiery Hand without compensation. And the prince would not be forthcoming with information if his client paid him enough to risk operating on her turf. Grace dismissed Ben Aro without a word as she set to having patrols of the Fiery Hand shadowed by her own thugs. Not 3 days later they ran for a squad binding a patrol of 5 men with flame tattoos on their faces. Though they managed to kill 2 of the prince's men, the rest was able to escape with their captives. It came as a surprise when Batanes the Bloody Blade, the prince's right-hand man, came with an offer for parley the next day. Ben Aro was in bad luck, it seemed. The prince offered her a tithe to the price of 6 slaves for every member of the Fiery Hand he captured in the slums. His employer was definitely paying him enough to operate on Grace's turf. 6 new free brothers and sisters was a price Grace was willing to accept for the infringement on her area and the kidnapping of the church guards. It was even enough to buy her silence against Ben Arrow. A few days later the kidnapping spree was over, as Batanes delivered a last payment to ensure another 30 chains were broken forever. It became yesterday's news the next week over, as the 4th yearling started what he was apparently paid to do. Allegedly, of course, for Grace believed there were less than 5 people in all of Volantis to know him as the perpetrator. On Monday, Tiger candidate Arizosi Gun was killed campaigning in the Bravo C Bazaar with a crossbow bolt to the heart. The man was of middling importance, to be truthful, and his prospects to be elected were slim. The killer escaped unseen, leaving only behind a crossbow of Mirish make that was most commonly used by sellsword from the city of its origin, though this specific model had been sold to foreign collectors as well. On Tuesday, Tiger candidate Akarani Jil was found stabbed to death in his bed by his servants, pinned above his head a note proclaiming sorrow. However, the note was written in High Valyrian instead of Carthene, making for a poor imitation of the modus operandi of the sorrowful men. As Akaran was known to propose closer alliance with Carth to pressure Slavers Bay for prices, it was apparent that it was not in the interest of Carth's nobles to kill the man. On Wednesday, Tiger candidate Veracrux Rilario, the only female Tiger running for office, was abducted in along with her carriage. Later the same day the carriage was found, Lady Veracrux inside with a head that had been flayed, though in an amateurish manner. The woman had been decently popular for her connections to several elephants and was seen as a preeminent head of a more moderate Tiger faction. By the time this news broke, the Tigers were baying for blood. Even the elephants condemned the attacks and promised military retribution should the culprit be found. On Thursday, General Bravano Tagaros was poisoned with a strong dose of the tares of lies. He died painfully the same day. The man was a heavyweight within the radical Tiger faction calling for a reconquest of the 3 daughters. His family had lost a lot of prestige since the Century of Blood, but the name Tagaros still demanded respect. Especially grievous to the nobles of Valyria was the fact that the direct line of the Tagaros blood stood to die out with the next generation, as Bravano only yet had a daughter of 7 and 10. He had been the last of the male line, and the loss of an ancient family of dating back to Valyria threatened to his compatriots to bring the Volanten army down on the city to enforce martial law. On Friday, Enesio Larvato, the governor of the Selores, the northernmost tributary city of Volantis, was set to arrive. There were rumors of problems in the Sorrows. However, Enesio's carriage was found with the man dead inside, branded black with an iron in the shape of a goat's head. The man had been feuding with the governor of Akab, the southernmost tributary city of Kohor. He had received ample support from wealthy Tigers with an eye for expansion. On Saturday, Mariano Freyata, the last Tiger candidate except for the incumbent Triarch, was found drowned in blue dye in his bed, the sticky substance dried to his corpse. Afterwards, the long bridge was closed and all gates into the old city were barred. The whole assembly of the old blood was crying for the murderers. On Sunday, the spark that set the tinder alight was the assassination attempt on the incumbent Tiger Triarch for 10 years, Malakwo Magai. The wily man of 50 had been visiting the grieving daughter Oriana Tagaros when a group of 30 assassins were slain by his guard. Discovered among the dead was the head guard of Dornifos Penamion, making it impossible for the man to be re-elected despite his discernibly truthful proclamations of innocence. Malakwo, in a singular political masterstroke, went on to betroth his nephew to Oriana Tagaros with the allowance for the young man to take on his bride's name. His only condition was gladly met by Oriana Tagaros, and she announced her intent to run for the office of Triarch herself the next day, making her a clear favorite for the position. It became almost a certainty that, for the first time since the Century of Blood, the Tigers would be the ones ruling Volantis. Only 2 moons were left until the next election, but already the old cats in the city were sharpening their claws and gearing up for war. Whatever madness had gripped the world, Grace was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it did. Both the Prince of Knives and the 4th yearling were discovered dead not a week after. The upper echelons of their organizations were wiped out, too. And the world drowned in chaos when most of the warehouses of the merchants buying out the food stores of Volantis were burned down in a coordinated strike the next night. After the fires died down, only ashes could be recovered. Along with the corpses of the guards of the larders, seemingly locked in combat with soldiers of the fiery hand. News of similar attacks in Volantis subsidiary cities trickled in over the next days. In a single night, more than 70% of the entire harvest and food reserves of Greater Volantis were destroyed. The army was still in the city to ward against more assassinations that never came, keeping the old city secure. On the other side of the Rhone, the poor people in the slums felt hungry after a few days, and thousands left the faith of the Lord of Light. The priests were unable to prove their innocence and found itself in a street war against the angry mob of Volantis. Small riots were starting to appear all around as people tried to plunder any food still available. Grace knew the despair of her people. However, she also saw the opportunity present for her cause. The poor soon realized the only way out as well. The old blood in the old city still stocked enough supplies for some, though not enough for all of Volantis. But even for the poorest man living on the wrong side of the long bridge, a sword had suddenly become cheaper than a week's worth of food. Zarok's Hondaxos awoke to the welcome sight of Nuajai sleeping beside him. His most recent pleasure boy had revealed himself a worthwhile investment. Nuajai had shown the flexibility of a contortionist. Zaro rose from his silken bedding as the sun broke through his curtains, the sun playing an enticing game with Nuajai's shining lean muscles. Zaro was almost tempted to remain a while longer, yet he knew good business waited for no man. And for a few moons now business had been great. Recently, trade in ships had become the most profitable business. Zaro had divested himself of the majority of his fleet. The amount of gold he had been paid were worth thrice the flotilla he'd sold. Out of formerly 42 ships in his possession, only 5 remained now. Trade to the west had become chaotic since the slave uprising in Volantis 3 moons ago, yet it had led to more ships bringing in goods from as far as Westeros in greater quantity. It seemed those self-same merchants from another continent came to recognize Karth for what it was, the greatest city that ever was or ever will be. More and more they purchased holdings in the city. And they were rich. Filthily so. Yet for their great wealth they were poor merchants, with little ability to drive a good bargain. The West AOC were picking the city clean of spices, luxury goods, ships and real estate, but the profits Carthene merchants achieved with the influx of gold might even see them rich enough to employ a Newtish warlord against the Dothraki and reclaim the glory days of the Cathai. The one commodity that would come into demand in the near future was not even contested by the new blood from the West. The West AOC did not trade in slaves, not even now where Slavers Bay could only sell their wares in Karth. The waters around Volantis had become too dangerous to risk. Traveling further upriver than where the Horulu met the Rhone had become an impossibility, and Vogaros Hor controlled the western city of Volantis still and captured every slaving vessel to brave those waters. Zaro knew the tigers now controlling the city would call the rabble to heel, but the old blood was heavily outnumbered and it would take time until order was restored to Valeria's oldest daughter. Consequently, the price for slaves had dropped yet further in Karth even as the masters of Slavers Bay were starting to run out of fresh meat. The only question was when the Unsullied would finally be sold in greater numbers. To the north a Sathi host of sellswords had decimated Kolzeko's Kalasar in a pincer attack with the Kohari conscripts. Their combined forces were now pushing east along the San, likely to reach the ruins of Sonath within the next 2 moons. The Dos Hkaline had called for peace between all Kalasars to combat this challenge to their dominance of the Great Grass Sea. War was all around, with only Karth a pool of tranquility within, with only Karth to profit. By now it was almost safer to circle around all of southern Essos via Sothorios and the Summer Isles. Tiosh had recently even pacified most of the Stepstones after a new pirate had grown increasingly bold for a short time. The pirate had not even lasted half a year, yet Tiosh was reluctant to claim Stepstones as the situation to the west was falling into the deepest chasm of chaos since Valeria's downfall. It seemed all of Essos west of the Bone Mountains and Westeros were simultaneously descending into civil war. Zaro had to cry a little, thinking of the business booming all around. He was a little surprised when one of his former captains asked for an audience. The man had been a good sailor, but Zaro knew him to have struck out on his own after he had sold his house in Karth to buy his own ship to trade in the troubled waters to the west. They had parted in good terms, yet the man had left only a little over 2 moons ago and was not supposed to return for another 6. Captain Acap was a lean and mean Carthene, though mixed with the coppery hues of his rapist Dothraki father. His twice-broken nose gave him a rough edge, and Zaro as always yearned for Acap to push Zaro down and take him roughly without care. Nuaj gave him pleasure as he asked, but Zoro wanted to experience pleasure being taken from him. Alas, the man had a wife and the sea and horse to keep him. He probably did not even realize Zoro's attraction. Prince Xhondexozakab addressed him quickly, an expression of uncertainty on his face. I need your advice on a discovery of mine off Gorosh that led me to cut my voyage short. You have recently sold the Vermilion Kiss along with many other boats of your fleet, have you not? Indeed, Captain Akab. Zoro knew his face to carry a wan smile and a trace of tears. It was great business all in all. I stand to rebuild my fleet within the next decade through Yetish shipwrights and have doubled my wealth in the last year alone. The flood of Sunset Landers have brought me great fortune. You have profited from this yourself, have you not? Akab seemed to weigh each of his words as he spoke, an unfamiliar habit for the gruff sailor. I, Prince. The West AOC seemed foolish or spendthrift at the time, yet what I've seen breaks the realm of foolishness and has left me in doubt to their purpose. It cannot be too bad now, can it, Akab? Karth is unassailable from without and they swelled the coffers of the 13, the Tourmaline Brotherhood and the ancient Guild of Spicers all. Us merchants need not even compete for them, they pay us all. Only the purebloods see their influence wither further, but is that not to be welcomed? Zoro could not imagine a better year for trade. Karth stood to rise higher and higher. Yes, my prince, and yet. I have seen the Vermilion Kiss scrapped near the coast of Sotorios. Not because of an outside attack, the damage must have been inflicted by the ship's own crew. It was wrecked along with most of the boats of your former fleet with more than 1,000 other boats in the same spot. I cannot make heads or tails of it. Why did the West Aosis buy all those boats, just to destroy them? Akab looked at Zoro in askance, yet the merchant prince could not supply an answer. Why would anyone ever destroy their own wealth? That was as good as sending their gold directly to the ocean floor. Why, if you have to be foolish, trade your gold for goods beforehand and not simply throw it overboat. Why even overpay on those boats? The West AOC might have just as well gifted all the gold to the merchants of Karth. Oh. Oh no. Was that even possible? Captain Akab. The man looked wary as Zoro spoke up, distress evident in the merchant prince's voice. Can you tell me if all the ships were Karthine? The captain seemed confused at the question, yet answered nonetheless. No, Prince Xhon, it was a pretty even split of Volanten and Karthine ships, with the odd vessel of different make in between. All thoroughly trashed, none salvageable. No 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 no. Do you know if anyone else has made the discovery of this graveyard of ships, Captain? No, my prince. It was not along the normal trading routes. A storm had blown me off course and the rocks beneath the sea are treacherous in the area. Good captains tend to avoid the area. Bad captains die there. Captain Akab, let me give you an advice and a warning. Spend your gold as soon as possible. Buy goods, trade it for silver, just get rid of it. Before it is too late. And do not tell anyone else of what you have found. The good captain looked scared at Zoro's words, as scared as Zoro felt. All thoughts of Akab's deliciously sculpted muscles had left Zoro, and the merchant prince was feeling anxious and elated. Zoro knew this feeling, it had the smell of peppers and cinnamon, of fortunes to be won. Zoro had just been given the best chance to increase his wealth yet again, but chaos loomed that Zoro could not even imagine. As soon as Captain Akab had left, Zoro left to consult the warlocks at the House of the Undying. A score of his guard came along, and he brought enough gold to bribe Pietri thrice over. The magic might have left the warlocks dry, yet they still commanded the knowledge of ages. And none had dared approach their halls since they closed their doors almost a year ago now. Why should anyone, really? Business had been booming, fortunes ever on the rise. At the House of the Undying, not even an acolyte came out to receive Zoro. But the merchant prince needed answers, so he let himself in. It was the first time in his life that he dared not to wait for one of the warlocks, fear of something almost greater driving him. Maybe not greater, but something infinitely more corporeal than the sorcerers of Karth had been in the last year. There was no one to offer him any shade of the evening to see and the truths of the unknown, yet Zoro pushed on. Through the serpent's mouth, the wandering the innards of the grey ruin of old, Zoro did not stop, Zoro was never stopped. For the first time ever, Zoro arrived at the center of the snake's coil. But when he entered the inner sanctum of the warlocks, Zaro realized this old bastion was not the house of the undying anymore. Only the house of dust was left. Blue-lipped corpses welcomed him. Acolytes at the entrance, warlocks further in, the mummified undying ones at the center. Whatever had happened in these haunted halls, Zaro did not care to find out. He fled, along with his guard, and never dared to look back. Karth was not safe from the chaos of the West. Zaro knew it now. He started buying ships again. He did not make losses, no, he had earned too much gold beforehand, and he did not discern for quality like he used to. A moon later, Zaro had gotten rid of almost all the gold he had received from the West AOC. He knew he should have left when he heard of the first pureblood dead. The first of many. Zaro knew it to be the West AOC that had left the open contract with the sorrowful men, the one with a ridiculous bounty for each pureblood killed, yet he had no proof. There was no motive. And the only other people to have enough gold to buy the assassin's services in bulk were the many times over enriched merchants, the ones that had been pushing for a new distribution of power in Karth for a few moons now. Yet for all the merchants' gold, the pureblood still had influence with the city guard. The members of the ancient guild of spicers were the first to be hunted by the troops of the nobles. Yet the open contract for pure-blooded heads did not stop. And soon enough the 13, the spicers and the Brotherhood started buying the services of sellswords to meet the city guards in the streets. Only to see these prices for the sellsword services rise by the day when the cutthroats realized that the merchants of Karth had no ships to leave Karth with their wealth and an overabundance of gold. A few companies just tried taking the gold over time, without any services. But for all that mercenaries like to get paid for doing nothing, they like to spend their pay more still. And when the gold reached the larger populace of Karth in large quantities, Zaro for the first time in his life saw the value of gold dropping. Zaro boarded his ships soon after, loading all the goods and valuables they could carry as the fighting in Karth grew more and more chaotic. In hindsight it turned out to be the smartest decision of any individual west of the Bone Mountains in what came to be known as the Second Century of Blood. Zarok's Hondaxos was the only merchant from Karth or elsewhere to escape to Yeti with most of his wealth intact. Zaro's life regained a semblance of normalcy as he established himself in Yeti. As ever, business was booming for Zarok's Hondaxos. Not soon after the now former merchant prince left the city, Karth closed the Jade Gates for all seafaring vessels going east or west. It was a measure taken to protect Karth against foreign attacks as it clawed itself apart, anarchy reigning throughout its streets. The conflict between the purebloods and the merchants would see Karth devastated for years to come, not to recover its prestige and status for more than 3 decades after the dust of the fighting settled. Even as an old man Zarok's Hondaxos knew it had been his greatest stroke of fortune to leave for Yeti when he did. He never returned for Karth, nor for any other place to the west of the Bone Mountains as the carnage of the Second Century of Blood ran its course. Instead Zarok's Hondaxos rose to be the wealthiest exile in Yeti with the goods and the gold he took with him from his last days in the greatest city that ever was. Bonus. So I had this idea for a fun snippet. That just ballooned into the 500+ words semi-chapter below. Enjoy. Hello Dairy Diary. We have returned from the Stark Tully wedding. Well, actually we have not returned. That is, we have returned, just not from the wedding. There was no wedding. So our trip was just like a little family vacation. That we did not return from, I notice now that I write about it. At least not all of us. Bal's gone. But that it okay, because Bal turned out to be a fucking cunt. He even called me fucking cunt. Bal returned before us because Dad did not like his raving. On second thought, Dad also did not like Bal's raving. So Bal's gone now, to rave and reeve in the Septstones stepson's stepstones. Are there any septs in the stepstones? Definitely not after Bal's done reeving. Though I do not think Bal will manage to reeve much, he's only got 8 longboats. That is not even a proper raid team. And those 8 boats are half empty. Though, Bal's taken Roderick and Marin. But it's okay, they are 14 and 13 now, proper time for a first reeve. Makes me nostalgical remember my first reeving. And Bal says he'll become king of the stepstones. Father says Bal will die before he accomplishes that, though. Euron says the same. Most people that Euron says will die usually die. And Baal would have become king anyways because Dad is now king. Except that Baal will not become king because Dad said so because Baal wanted to leave. I don't really get it, but we're now all royalty except Baal. I wrote royalty right the first time. I just wasn't sure. Because Dad is now the Salt King of the Iron Islands. But there's like a king above Dad. Not the crazy dude on the Iron Throne, Ace. The king above Dad is Rickard Stark. Does that make Rickard Stark royalty? Super royalty? Uber royalty? Royalty? Heh, titty. Readless regardless, Rickard Stark is like a king. That sounds right. So now we Greyjoys are kings and the Starks are our kings. I also met my new crown prince Eddard Stark. Ned. We're friends now. He's cool, he gets me. Won't go whoring with me, but if I was him I wouldn't either. Ned's got, like, the most ravishing wife. She's beautiful. And nice. More importantly, beautiful. I don't know how Ned ever manages to leave his bed. No, wait, not his wife yet, in like a moon they'll wed. I've been invited to Winterfell for their wedding. Because Ned's my friend. And Bobby. Bobby is my friend now, too. Sadly, Bobby wouldn't go whoring with me either. I understand Bobby, too, though. Because he is supposed to marry Rickard Stark's daughter. And Rickard is scary and a king besides, and it would be stupid to offend a king. And that's all that's happened since we left for Riverrun. Now Dad is sending some boats to help the Lannisters with something and people north to live there. And build ships. Lots of ships. I am now mostly playing with Oregon and Aaron and Robin and Asher and Theon. Alanis can't care for them because she's missing Roderick and Marin and crying all the time. She is not missing crying all the time, she is crying all the time. Anyway, Asher, Theon and Alanis leave for Castle Casterly Rock soon. So now I play only with Oregon and Aaron and Robin because I don't have much else to do before the wedding. Where Ashera becomes my crown princess. That sounds wrong, but I counted and it's right. Goodbye diary. Vic. Notes. So obviously, it took some time getting this whole thing written. Plus, real life stuff, but neither do you actually want to hear about that nor do I want to talk about it in this forum. And I have set myself the restriction of only answering comments within a few days of posting a chapter. In conclusion, I'm not dead, and my fics aren't abandoned. I'll reply to your unanswered comments soon. Now the important parts. Character names. The majority of all characters you've met until now or that have been name-dropped exist in canon. Or we know they exist dynasty-wise and I have given them a name. Exceptions in earlier chapters, Rickard's spy in the Riverlands, several of Rickard's guard, Bessie, Kynna. This chapter there are more. For example the crime bosses in Volantis, Captain Ahab the Muscled Merman and the Killed Tigers. Most of the names are entirely made up, yet some have dynastic connections to pre-existing characters. Just FYI. Victorian's Dairy Diary. This started as a snippet. Then it ballooned. I love it. Should I make it a recurring thing? Chapter 20, Chaos to the North. Notes. But they are wrong, it's just a trick of perspective. An illusion, false magic. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. The old man rose from his cot to the beat of raven wings. It turned out to be another letter from his great-grandnephew. Even if the old man was not yet totally blind he did not care to read it. Rhaegar Targaryen's conduct fell far short of the standards Maester Aemon held his friendly associates to. If his brother Egg still sat on the Iron Throne, Prince Rhaegar would have been shipped north already to keep Aemon company forevermore. His brother should have named Sweet Roll his heir. Then, at least, the kings would know of duty. How the mighty had fallen. It was a rare day that Aemon wished for another Bloodraven to rise to power, to set the Seven Kingdoms right again, by any means necessary. Aemon looked to the other letter again, the one he had received almost a sennight ago now. It still sat on his bedside table, the paper worn from the many times Aemon had read it. Dear cousin Aemon. She was kin, too. It did not do to dwell on these thoughts again as Aemon had again and again over the last week. He had made the trip to Shadow Tower for business, he needed to be focused. 20 days ago the skin changer Hagen had sought refuge with the watch, grievously injured and half-mad according to Maester Mullin. A patrol had picked him up at the Bridge of Skulls after recognizing him from Westwatch by the bridge. The old wilderling could count himself lucky he had been a friend of the watch for decades and was well known to most brothers. Maester Mullin knew he was incapable of curing the man of his wounds and asked for aid from Castle Black. Eamon had asked Commander Corgyle directly to be sent over. Mullin had written that Hagen seemed to have been attacked by his own bonded wolves. All that Eamon knew of Skin Changer, which was admittedly very little, left him with a gut feeling that something had gone terribly wrong for Hagen. Only inexperienced or weak Skin Changers tended to lose control of their beasts like that, and Hagen was neither. Hagen's wolves had been his family, their walk bond should have pacified the animals even if the man was not in direct control of his wolves. The most plausible conclusion, a quite terrifying one, was that a more powerful Skin Changer had wrested Hagen's control of his animals from him and used Hagen's own pack to devour him. Neither a powerful Skin Changer that was openly opposed to a declared friend of the watch was a good option, nor was a Skin Changer that did not observe the tenet not to consume human flesh while wearing the skin of an animal a good alternative. Yet it was another event that drove Eamon to ride to the Shadow Tower in haste. Around a moon past it had happened, out of nowhere. His last keepsake from his life as a Targaryen prince, his cream and silver dragon egg had suddenly combusted in a spitfire. Corgyle had been incensed at the event, yet Eamon could not bring himself to care for his commander's wrath. All that Eamon knew of dragons, which was probably more than any other person alive in the whole world, did not help him find an explanation for his egg's destruction. For his dragon's death. Then Mullin's letter arrived, and Eamon deduced that Hagen must have been wounded around the same time his egg went up in flames. It left him with a shadow of a doubt, yet even the possibility was worse than a rogue Skin Changer. A dragon was fire made flesh. Living, breathing magic. And a Skin Changer's bond with his animal was the only working of magic that Eamon could observe in all of Westeros, aside maybe from concoctions of wildfire. What if something had changed with magic itself? Today Eamon would finally receive his answers. Hagen had awoken yesterday, yet the man had been too weak and frightened to hold a proper conversation with. Not so this time as Eamon entered his patient's chamber. Now Hagen only looked catatonic. He looked at Eamon blankly when he was addressed. Hagen. I am glad you are awake. Can you tell me what happened to you? Eamon only got an empty stare in return, so he continued asking. My brothers found you injured at the Bridge of Skulls, barely clinging on to your life. They say your own wolf pack was stalking you. There were tears in Hagen's eyes now, the vacant void was being replaced by deep despair. Hagen turned to look at his left leg. Or rather, to look at where his left leg used to be. I am sorry, Hagen. Eamon spoke quietly, we could not save it. The lacerations cut down to the bone, we had to. Greyskin attacked me there. He bit into my ankle and sliced into my knee with his claws. Hagen's words came out like a whisper, yet his voice still cut through Eamon's. We had been together as long as I remember. I fed him by hand. Greyskin was the first animal whose skin I ever wore. I lost something greater than a mere leg that day, Crow. When Hagen looked up again and met Eamon's eyes, all the Maester saw was rage for a second before the emotion seemed to collapse in itself again. Did your brothers find Lump, too? What is Lump? Eamon knew only Hagen had been found. Not even his beasts of burden were found, the ones to carry his goods. A desolate chuckle escaped Hagen before he answered. Not what is Lump, Maester, who was Lump? Lump was a young Skin Changer I recently took under my wing, kicked out by his family. I was guiding him on how to break an animal, and he had slipped into his first rabbit when I lost my gift. It was my bonds, my partners, they are just gone. Can you believe I was the lucky one between Lump and I? My pack turned on me and the boy, yet Lump did not even return to his body as the wolves tore into his flesh. We use pain to bring back Skin Changers to their bodies as they learn, you see. But Lump didn't return. Couldn't return, I fear. He lost his gift while he was wearing the skin of a rabbit. I doubt the critter survived the wolves' carnage either, though. Eamon did not know what to say to that, and a lonely silence settled on the two of them. After a fashion Eamon checked on Hagen's health again before leaving. Eamon almost did not dare ask when the attack occurred. In the end he did, leading to Hagen's question how long he had been asleep for. Eamon saw the man's heart break again when Hagen realized that, even in his dreams, Hagen would never run with his wolves anymore. The broken wilderling did not say another word after, just staring into the emptiness, lost to his thoughts. Left to his own ruminations after his conversation with Hagen, Eamon went on to write a letter addressed to Maester Marwyn of the Citadel. The man had approached Eamon already when he was but an acolyte. At first Eamon had felt bemused to be treated as something between an idol and a research subject at the same time. After engaging with Marwyn on dragon lore, however, they had started a friendly correspondence on many things Valyrian and all things magic. Maybe the Department of Higher Mysteries had observed other phenomena relating to magic recently. Over the next 3 days Eamon tried to get Hagen to open up more about the disappearance of his powers, but the wilderling seemed a husk of man now, alive and awake but barely responsive. He did try to get out of his bed often, though, and Eamon decided the man was healthy enough to not need any of his attentions anymore. On the 4th day he set out to ride for Castle Black on the wall's crown. He did not expect to meet Hagen standing on the top of the wall, though, looking south. Hagen spoke to him then, though it did not seem he was wanting for Eamon to respond. "I have always wondered what the Promised Lands look like, Maester. Us skin changers make poor raiders, our abilities lie elsewhere." "Laid elsewhere? Did you know a skin changer could not cross the wall wearing the skin of a bird?" "I tried. I slipped into Whitewing many a time, yet it almost seemed like the wall repelled me." Hagen's profile looked most somber, an air of melancholy about him. "I loved flying. I always wavered between Greyskin and Whitewing for my second life. There is nothing freer than soaring over the Whitecaps or seeing the infinity of the haunted forest beneath you. Standing up here on the wall reminds me of those times. I am glad I came up here for the sunrise." Finally, Hagen turned to look at Eamon before finishing his soliloquy. "I am a little disappointed though, to be honest. The south side of the wall looks just the same as the north from up high." "All of this," Hagen said as he made a sweeping gesture encompassing both the north and the true north, "is just the same. Why do you hunt and kill us with impunity when there is no difference between our sides, Crow?" Eamon could not answer in that moment, and neither could his guard. The silence between all of them was deafening. Hagen merely looked resigned as no reply came forth before crossing the walkway to look north into the haunted forest. "And what fools we all are, for dreaming it is greener on the other side. It is all just the same. Will you do me a favor, Crow?" Hagen's words were barely understandable before he spoke up at the end, his eyes transfixed on the land of his birth. He did not stop to look at Eamon for confirmation. "Scatter my ashes beneath the heart tree in the true north, will you?" There was a look of infinite yearning as Hagen said his last words and fell forward, falling down the wall into the lands many wildlings desperately wanted to leave. Eamon did not even hear a sound as Hagen the skin changer met his end in the home that he loved. The ride east after passed Eamon and his companions like a blur. None of them were in the mood for talking and they made good time, arriving at Icemark by nightfall. Before dawn the next morning they broke camp, intent on reaching Castle Black before the sun set again. 49 years on the wall had left Eamon an able horseman on icy ground. Neither he nor his companions wanted to spend another night in one of the abandoned castles, even if they had stocked enough firewood for the patrols. The sun rose before they reached the night fort. On the snowy field between the haunted forest and the wall stood a lone rider, only flanked by a beast of burden. Next to it a pole of weirwood had been rammed into the ground, and knew a face to be carved into the stake. It was a first-man custom, a way to establish a peaceful negotiation ground for talks between warring parties. Of course, Eamon could not see the weeping face from the top of the wall, nor the rider next to it. However, he had brought his Mirish far eye along for his astronomical observations. It came in handy to discern the situation in front of them. After all, the free folk knew that the night fort had been abandoned for more than 200 years now. However, what Eamon did manage to see through the far eye made him feel as if the blood in his veins froze over. The rider was not mounted on a horse. The creature that came for parley sat on a giant spider, bluish-white like snow on a frozen river. Before them stood a myth in the flesh. and even though it should be impossible to discern movement on the wall from the bottom, the other's head was turned towards their galloping horses above him, and the rider stepped down from his abominable mount, preparing to receive them at the weirwood stake. Eamon was left with a difficult choice. By right he should ride on to Castle Black to inform Lord Commander Corgyle of the situation. But it would take 2 days before the commander could meet with the other if they left now, and who was to say the creature below the wall would wait that long? Could they risk the possibility of obtaining information on the mount and its rider? Would the Dornish commander even believe them? Eamon's worries were further compounded by the conviction that, despite his experience in his position, the commander was a rather conventional general that would probably be at least a little overwhelmed by the situation and reveal himself a bad spokesman for this situation. The Maester of Castle Black knew he could force the issue with his companions. He was in command of their riding group after. He could decide that it would be him that went down to talk with this creature waiting for them. Yet he did not. All his guards were experienced rangers, so he put the matter to the vote, presented his position on their options, and left them all to confirm his words with his far eye. After an hour of talks with grim faces, the 13 men voted 10-3 that Eamon should speak with the other, accompanied by 2 guards. 4 brothers were immediately sent ahead to Castle Black to inform Commander Corgyle of the situation. Deaf Dick Follard and Corin Strongarm flanked Eamon as they approached the other after the 3 of them were let down from the wall with the stocked pulleys and rope kept in a secure compartment at the night fort. The first thought Eamon had as he finally stood face to face with the other was that it was gracefully fair and frighteningly foreign. Almost transparent skin stretched like corporeal fog over a web of blue veins and a skeleton of crystalline bones, looking sturdy and fragile at the same time. It was disconcerting. Impossibly blue eyes seemed to uncover all secrets in Eamon's soul. Eamon almost greeted the man, at least it appeared to be male, in the common tongue. He was about to offer up greetings in the old tongue instead, yet he hesitated again for a second. Would this language be understood by his opposite? For all he knew, the others had not been seen for 8 millennia. Who knew what language they spoke? The old tongue was still his best bet to establish communication, so Eamon started speaking. Greetings, stranger. I am Eamon Targaryen, the shield that guards the realms of men. Who are you, and why have you come to parley with the Night's Watch? Greetings, Eamon Targaryen. I am the being spoke. Its name sounded like black ice cracking on a lake and hail pelting the wall in a snowstorm. Eamon almost thought the being looked at him differently after hearing his name. In your tongue it means he who buries mountains in snow. But please, call me Snow. I have come to negotiate peace terms on behalf of he who rules the winds of winter, God King of the lands of always winter, and the king in the north whose name is Stark. Eamon had not known what to expect, but definitely not this. Eamon tried to consider all the information contained in that introduction. 1. The others were unified in a nation under a ruler that claimed dominion over the most inhospitable place in Westeros. 2. This nation was to the others' knowledge either at war with the old kingdom of winter or had an armistice agreement in place. In other words, a kind of diplomatic rapport existed between the kingdom of winter and the others. A relation the Iron Throne had not inherited when it absorbed the kingdom of winter into the 7 kingdoms. At that Eamon almost thought in expletives. 3. The others' intelligence was a horribly outdated. Well, that last was a welcome surprise. It made sense, though, considering the others had not been heard of for 8.000 years and, apparently, the wall blocked magic. All in all, 2 pieces of bad news and 1 piece of good news. Dear cousin Eamon. 2 pieces of good news. Eamon decided 2 things in that moment. He would accept the wedding invitation his second cousin thrice removed had extended him. After all, the Starks seemed to have held their greatest cards in the Game of Thrones close to their chest for millennia and now seemed finally ready to flip the whole board, so a visit would at least be interesting. And Ashera Dane, great-great-great-grandniece of his mother Deanna Dane, had promised Eamon the protection of his great-great-grandnoblings Rhaenys and Aegon to the best of her ability without condition attached. And he would bring the most information about the others he could squeeze from this one meeting as a wedding gift. In 1 moon's time the Starks would become Eamon's kin by marriage. Besides, he owed the Starks a debt for not seeing his great-grandnephew Rhaegar's descent into madness, nor did he try to discourage the Crown Prince's foolish notions. House Stark could have been almost extinct by the fits of a madman on the Iron Throne. Besides, Aemon doubted any of the lords south of the Neck would even believe his report of White Walkers, and with the imminent civil war ahead, the United North was the best chance for the whole world to combat whatever was in store for them. Monsters from the Age of Heroes reappearing was bad enough. If they descended on the South in the worst throes of the Civil War, Aemon could not even imagine what chaos and destruction they could bring. So Aemon smiled, and made merry, and lied to he who buries mountains in snow. He who buries mountains in snow, I am most surprised by your visit. King Stark will be, too, when I go to report to him. What has happened that has left God King he who rules the winds of winter dissatisfied with the current arrangement? We have noticed a disturbance within the realms of magic. Could that have been the cause? Aemon was spinning his yarn from thin air and flimsy conjectures, but it did not seem to confuse Snow. At least, Aemon thought so. Far be it from Aemon to claim that he could read the face of another for lies. Yet the other in front of him simply answered. You are mistaken, Aemon Targaryen, the disturbance in magic is not the cause. Rather, it was he who ruled the winds of winter who has caused the disturbance, together with the man who is a crow who is the forest. It is most curious, Aemon Targaryen, that it is you I meet. It must have been the last thing he has seen. King Stark must hold you in high regard. The man who is a crow who is the forest asked as his last request to bring you a gift and a message. The one thing a raven needs less than teeth is a tongue. He did not say more. I hope it tells you everything you need to know. Aemon had to swallow at hearing his uncle's favorite phrase. The one thing a raven needs less than teeth is a tongue. A raven only needs ears to hear a secret, and wings to carry it quickly. His uncle's tenets for his spies, from the time that Bloodraven was still the master of whisperers of the Seven Kingdoms. Aemon was sure his voice was wavering slightly as he addressed Snow again. Is the gift my uncle has asked you to bring to me perchance a sword of grey and black? Snow replied before walking over to the massive elk that stood behind him. He returned with a bundle wrapped in old furs and the elk in tow. Aemon felt his hands trembling as he unwrapped Dark Sister from the furs and beheld the Valyrian sword in its splendor. Afterwards Aemon bound the sword in its furs again and handed it to Thorin for safekeeping. Yet before Aemon could address his opposite, the other spoke first. I bring another gift, this one is for your king. At that Snow pulled back the cover of the other bundle on the elk's back, this one a lot bigger. Aemon found himself face to face with a dead man, thin and gaunt with skin as cold as ice and as black as night, and broken eyes of the same color. The corpse was clutching weapons of translucent blue ice to his chest, weapons of the same make as Snow the other carried. Aemon merely stared at the dead man, uncomprehending. This is the body of Brandon the Broken Stark, twin brother of Brandon the Breaker Stark. He has done his penance in death, upholding the oath he broke in his life. This is the body of Brandon the Broken Stark, 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, King on the Wall, the Night's King and thief and death of she who danced with snowflakes in the storm. And now, his watch has ended. Aemon drew a sharp breath and heard Thorin behind him do the same. Thorin's strong arm almost pulled his sword, and would have if Aemon had not turned around fast enough and grabbed Thorin's hand on his pommel, keeping it down. Don't, Thorin. We are under a banner of truce. Aemon knew he did not have the strength to prevent Thorin from breaking parley, but luckily, his brother obeyed. As Aemon turned around he found Snow watching him with an unreadable expression. A little rattled, Aemon spoke to break the tension, the first thing to come to his mind that did not concern the most infamous villain of the Watch, whose body Aemon now found himself in possession of. Can you tell me of my uncle, of Brynden Bloodraven? I haven't seen him for almost 30 years now, ever since he went north of the wall. Aemon did not know the connection between Brynden Bloodraven and the king of the others, nor the meaning of the man who is a crow who is the forest. Maybe Snow would expose even more information. After all, Snow suddenly looked shocked as Aemon asked his question. You mean to tell me the man who is a crow who is the forest has taken on the incarnation of Brynden Bloodraven for over 2 decades? But that is. You mean to tell me the man had enough willpower left to overpower the crow and the forest after such a long time? Well, the tense situation of the Night's King's body was seemingly diffused. Sadly, Aemon had no idea what Snow was asking of him. I'm sorry, can you explain what you mean? I fear I do not understand what being the man who is a crow who is the forest meant for my uncle. Eamon saw suspicion cross the other's face. Was he supposed to know what the name meant? Eamon almost seamlessly continued talking. King Stark has not told me of my uncle's fate. I do not know whether the information was too sensitive for me to know or whether my king wanted to spare me the pain such knowledge would bring. At that, he who buries mountains in snow looked at Eamon almost with pity before answering. It is a great sacrifice to take on the mantle of the man who is a crow who is the forest. Was a being of great magic. It was the champion of the gods of the forest, yet also not. You see, the gods of the forest do not let their champion fight in their name. They possess him and take his will away so they may take action in the world themselves. The one-eyed man you knew as Brynden Bloodraven was also the three-eyed crow and the forest of infinite red eyes. To find their champions the gods of the forest look through their eyes of blood for a green seer, to lure him into their embrace and bind him with their grasping white hands. However, the gods' actions contain great risks for them beside many advantages. The first weakness lies in the green seer's body, for it needs to remain connected to the weirwood network at all times. But the trees found a way around the dilemma of having to keep their champion confined. While the champion is bound to one place, he can see through the eyes of the weirwoods that are everywhere and the eyes of the three-eyed crow, who can go anywhere. Still, the body of the man who is a crow who is the forest becomes weaker and weaker. After some time only the trees keep the body alive, until even they cannot prevent inevitable death anymore. The second weakness lies in the green seer's spirit. For while the trees control what the green seer sees, the green seer can withstand the corruption of his mind with a strong will. Yet men are not made to see through uncountable eyes, see uncountable things. It breaks their spirit, and the gods of the forest simply wear the husk that remains. Brynden Bloodraven is truly remarkable, to withstand the gods' assault on his mind for decades. I have not heard of another man who is a crow who is the forest that ever retained his will beyond 5 years. Yes, Uncle Brynden was, for all his faults, a man of iron will. Eamon spoke almost softly, yet you are wrong about him. He hasn't seen the world through one eye for a long time. Brynden Bloodraven had 1,000 eyes, and one. They even sing a song about it. Snow was quiet as he listened, and solemn. He was a man worthy of songs. The other did not fill the silence that followed his words, and Eamon left it to linger as he remembered the great things his uncle had wrought, and the few good memories that remained between Eamon and his uncle. How did he die? Eamon only noticed it was him that asked the question after the words had rung between him and Snow. He sacrificed himself to bring an end to the crow and the forest. To bring an end to those who sing the songs of the earth. To bring an end to those who lurk in the deep. To bring an end to those who saunter in the shadows. To bring an end to those who linger in the light. To bring an end to those who fly with fire. To bring an end to it that feasts. To bring an end to us, to those who come with the cold. And to bring an end to all the magic in the world. Eamon thought of his dragon egg, then. Of his dragon egg that had burst into flames. When Eamon was young he had sometimes dreamt he flew his dragon skyscraper through all the known world and beyond. He had dreamt of raining fire on those that were evil. Yet as Eamon grew older he saw that all that remained of the dragons of old was not the destruction of evil. Only destruction remained. His uncle Brynden had once more prevented possible calamity from striking the Seven Kingdoms, just as he had when he killed Innis Blackfyr to stop the Blackfyr cause from retaining supporters. Just as he always had, uncompromising in his conviction and without mercy for anyone. Not even for himself. This time he who buries mountains in snow did fill the silence as it persisted. Around a moon ago our king, he who rules the winds of winter, for the first time in 8,000 years, felt the stirrings of prophecy. Of the prince who was promised to come into being, of Azor Ahai being reborn, of the last hero rising again, of the second war for the night to start. Yet something happened. The strings of fate snapped, a moon, a sennight, a day away from setting it all into motion once more. And our king grew tired of waiting, of all the strings to align once more. It was not living, what he did, the last of us that remained awake. But our king also grew fearful. As you know, magic has been waning in the world for 384 years now, and more so for 129 years. If this continued, our king feared we would be too weak to even mount up a proper fight in the Second War. That we would have no chance at victory, or that what people remembered of us would be a shadow of who we are, not those who come with the cold at the height of our power. That we would be a footnote in the annals of men, or be forgotten entirely, with not even songs remaining. To prevent such a fate, he who rules the winds of winter sought out the man who is a crow, who is the forest, to strike a bargain, to once more let you humans know of our power, so you may never forget us. And what bargain was struck? This was it. This was the linchpin, the information Eamon needed to prepare for what was to come. Yet he who buries mountains in snow did not answer Eamon's question. Snow merely smiled, and in that smile Eamon only saw hunger, and winter, and death. And when he who buries mountains in snow spoke once more, Eamon shivered. My king will tell the terms of the bargain he struck to your king himself. Here, once in 5 moons and once in 10 moons' time, he who rules the winds of winter will be present to welcome the king in the north, whose name is Stark. After they have talked, they will find themselves either at war, or at peace. Only know this. We, those who come with the cold, hereby break from the armistice agreement we made with the Kingdom of Winter 8,000 years ago, when the long night ended and Brandon the Builder helped us build the border wall to separate the domains of winter and ice eternal. As the last words left the other's mouth, the wind suddenly picked up, blowing up the snow around, shrouding Eamon and Snow in a veil of flakes. When it settled not 10 seconds after the other had disappeared from the parley ground, blown away by the breeze along with his spider of ice. Left behind were only Eamon, his 2 guards, the elk and the corpse of the Night's King, shivering from something that was not the cold. Riding hard they reached Castle Black at the hour of the wolf, and yet shivering still, Eamon and Corin left for Winterfell at the next dawn. Notes. More factions. There can never be enough. There's been a request for a list of factions and loyalties by Sabron of Blackwater. I'll do that at the end of the next chapter because the idea is fantastic. However, the list will be incomplete, as there can never be enough factions. Suspect all alliances and loyalties to be suspicious. Feedback please. I wasn't sure whether to cut the White Walkers, or not. Tell me what you think. Also, the next part of this chapter is very monologue heavy. The content inside I really want to get across, yet I fear I overdid it with Tywin's monologues. Did I strike a good balance? I just imagine Charles Dance schooling Cersei in ruling, and I'm good with the monologues. Yet I think that skews my perspective. Chapter 21, Chaos to the West. Notes. Chaos simply is. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. It had only been a week now that her father had come back from the wedding that never was, yet Cersei had never seen him move about so much before. Tywin Lannister had always been the lord that sat behind his goldenwood desk and stared at the men in front of it until they moved to do his bidding unsaid. Which happened very quickly, as it usually went. If it did not, well, there were always people looking to work for the richest family in Westeros. Now Tywin Lannister was spending his time in discussion with Lannister merchants and Lannister miners and Lannister relatives every second of the day in a frantic rush, almost, to do something. Cersei did not ask what. Her father had made his opinion abundantly clear on what a woman's position was supposed to be when he banned her from the training yard, what her position was supposed to be. A queen, but a woman still. However, it wasn't like Cersei was oblivious. Aunt Jenna talked to her, as did Uncle Tijet and Uncle Geryon, and many a maid knew not to cross her. The private docks of the Rock had seen unprecedented activity, though nobody could tell her what happened there. In fact, no one but her father and his closest confidants got in or out of there. Uncle Geryon's smile had grown strained, and that was always a reason to worry. He'd been barred from the cellars, too, much to his displeasure. Something was up. The presence of their new guests told her that the Ironborn were involved. Euron, Theon and Asher Greyjoy were treated more like valued friends instead of the imprisoned hostages that they were. Treating the squids like people was already a concession in Cersei's opinion, but her father had even instructed her to be courteous. It did not help that the only adult Greyjoy seemed to know next to nothing either and was weirding Cersei out besides. Alanis Harlaw, the mother of the 2 squidlings, seemed not entirely there regardless, so conversation with her was an exercise in futility. Cersei craved information to make sense of it all. Her last life plan burnt to nothingness like wildfire, now that her silver prince had revealed himself to be poisonous mercury instead. Elia Martell had been the prince's father's folly, but Lyanna Stark opened Cersei's eyes to the faults of the Targaryen heir himself. If only she'd seen it before Harrenhal, Jaime would still be with her. Now it was all too late. What was she to do? Tywin Lannister was clearly on the warpath. There could only be one goal that remained for him. The crown. Her father had tasted blood in Riverrun, Cersei was sure of it. The lions were on the prowl. Cersei needed to claim her own place in the pride. Jenna had managed it, her mother had, so why did her father not even try to notice his own daughter's capabilities? Cersei thought about praying to the stranger for a demise worthy of song for the Targaryens, but knew her father cared little for the Seven and their septons. One of the few things Cersei remembered vividly about her mother were walks in the September under the rock. They did not pray much, but had many a talk with the septons. After her death Cersei's father rarely visited the building, and Cersei followed his example. Still, there were some maidens there she paid a visit at times. Maybe she'd ask Rohan and Ciel to join her in another prayer, those two knew to keep quiet after all. Maybe Elia Martell would join their silent circle after the dragon's fall. Cersei felt herself smile at the thought. She'd love to see the Dornish whore join her father's guard Sir Eileen and her two favorite sisters in their own silent circle. A knock at the door interrupted her musing, and her uncle Kevan did not wait for her to bid him enter. He looked restless, as far as Cersei could see. Tywin was running him into the ground in his frenzy. The last Cersei had seen her father this frantic was in the hours leading up to her mother's murder and after. But then he'd been distraught, too, and now he definitely wasn't. He seemed driven, and dare Cersei say it, happier. But she could not know for sure, for Cersei could scarcely remember what Tywin looked like in his happier moods. Cersei, her uncle Kevan said, "Your father demands your presence. Follow me." They went down into the bowels of the rock, deeper and deeper. Kevan took Cersei along paths usually barred to everyone in the castle, past a multitude of old guards at numerous checkpoints. The rooms they passed looked like the vault they used to display their gold for guests, all of them. Hallway after hallway, floor after floor, Kevan and Cersei went down and down and down. At long last Kevan finally stopped in front of one of the many doors, this one made of solid gold by the looks of it, before turning towards his niece. "Cersei," Kevan said, "Tywin is inside. I believe the next hours will be challenging for you to grasp. They were for me, when your grandmother took me down here the first time. What Tywin tells you inside, never speak a word of it to outsiders. You will learn to understand of Lannister power, and that is dangerous knowledge." After he finished speaking Kevan abruptly turned around and left. Unsure what to expect Cersei gave the golden door a push. It opened seamlessly. Stepping through Cersei was met by golden prison bars with an elaborate gate made of gold, open and inviting. Cersei went on through. The sight beyond defied all her expectations. Cersei came upon a chamber made of solid gold. It had a golden walls, a golden bed with a pillow and blanket of spun gold and a golden table with 4 golden chairs. On the golden table stood replicas of food made of gold on golden plates, 4 cups of gold and a golden carafe, filled with water. Cersei's father Tywin Lannister sat on a golden chair, clad in their colors of crimson and gold, waiting for her. Next to him on the second golden chair there sat a skeleton, pale and sad. Its eyes seemed fixed on something behind Cersei's back, somewhere beyond the bars of solid gold that kept it locked in its golden grave. Tywin looked at Cersei, and once again Cersei wished she could just know her father's thoughts, wished to understand Tywin Lannister. Wished that Tywin Lannister understood her. "Take a seat, Cersei." Cersei's father addressed her, startling her. "Do you remember the cautionary tale of King Corlys X, my daughter?" Cersei took her seat across from her father, but internally she scoffed at the question. Was that why had her father summoned her to this golden prison in their ancestral vault, to ask her about the bedtime stories of her childhood? Cersei could not tell whether this was a joke she did not understand, or a lesson she was supposed to learn. Seeing her father as serious as ever, she gave her answer. "Of course, father. Mother used to tell it to us 7th day, no matter how sick we'd gotten of it. It did not matter that Jaime wanted to hear of Florian and Jonquil or that I wanted to hear of Lan the Clever. Mother would just smile at me and recount the story of the king with the golden touch. Tywine had that glitter to his eyes, the one thing his children remembered, a constant fixture on Tywine's face when his wife had still been alive. Indeed, daughter, I can imagine Joanna smiling at your request. But please, indulge me. Can you tell me the story, like your mother told it to you? Cersei thought of her mother Joanna sitting on her bedside, with bright eyes and a kind smile, and Cersei retold the story she'd heard hundreds of times from her mother's lips. Once upon a time, when heroes roamed the world, there was a king named Corlos, son of Corlos, the 10th of his name, whose wealth exceeded that of even the gods. Corlos lived on a mountain of gold, and every day he brought more of it to the surface, for he loved nothing more than the sight of gold. But with his wealth grew his hubris, and so one day he built a statue of himself made entirely of gold, the greatest statue to ever grace the face of Planetos. And when the statue was complete, he looked at it and said, "Behold! There is no finer sight, no greater creation on this world than this golden statue. Not even the gods can rival it in its glory." However, his words angered the gods of the forest, the rivers and the earth, the very same gods who had blessed King Corlos lying with all their wealth. With all their wrath they descended on Corlos in a dream, and they cursed him with the golden touch, that everything he ever touched would turn into solid gold, and that his gold would be his downfall. And when Corlos woke, he woke in a bed of gold, and he laughed. Unable to contain his joy, King Corlos ran out of his room in his silken robes of cloth of gold and, foregoing breakfast and his daily bath, became lost in touching everything he came upon. Corlos touched chairs and tables, knives and spoons, trees and bushes, and all he touched turned to gold. Corlos only returned to his castle when the sun had reached its zenith and he had run around and had touched all the things he could see. By now he was exhausted from all his excitement, so he asked his servants to draw him his bath. Yet when Corlos stepped into his golden bathtub, he did not sink into comfortable warm water, rather, he found himself smothered in golden powder. He asked his servants to pour more water into his bath. But as soon as the water touched his skin it turned to gold. Still, Corlos loved the golden shine, so he was content even without his bath. Instead, Corlos asked his servants to set his table so he could break his fast. Yet when Corlos sat on his golden chair at his golden table and grabbed a loaf of bread to eat, the bread turned into solid gold in his hand, and his stomach rumbled. So Corlos ordered his servant to bring his silken gloves, and as soon as he wore his gloves of spun gold, he picked another piece of bread. Biting into his food with a relish, Corlos found the bread turned into gold the moment his teeth came into contact with it. A little angry now, Corlos grabbed a golden cup and tried to drink some water, yet the water turned to powdered gold in his mouth and he had to spit it all out. Growing more and more desperate, Corlos tried to eat one piece of food after another, but they all turned to gold the second his body came into contact with them. Corlos in his rage grabbed his servant by the wrist as he was brought a fresh platter of meat, and to Corlos' horror, his servant started turning into gold. After a few seconds the servant's face was forever locked in a golden scream. Corlos looked at his hands and at what he had wrought, and he fled to his chambers and locked himself in, hiding under a blanket of gold. So shocked was Corlos that he did not notice his beloved wife entering his room to see what was wrong with him. Corlos only came to when his wife took Corlos' face into her hands to ask Corlos why he was so frightened. Corlos could not avert his eyes as his wife started turning into gold. Corlos sobbed and begged at the gods to lift his curse, yet the gods remained silent. All of the king's servants fled his castle the same day as they learned of the queen's and the servants' fate, and only Corlos and his daughter remained in the great golden castle. After Corlos had cried himself to sleep, his daughter beseeched the gods of the forest, the rivers and the earth to take their curse from their father, yet the gods remained silent. So Corlos' daughter offered her own life in exchange, as long as her father was spared. This time the gods heard her prayer and once more returned to visit Corlos in his dream. The gods lifted the curse and told Corlos of his daughter's sacrifice. But gods are a vengeful lot. All the things Corlos had turned into gold would remain frozen that way in eternity. And instead of just taking Corlos' golden touch away, the god made it so that all the gold that Corlos came to touch henceforth would turn into dust. And Corlos woke in a bed of dust and found his daughter lost to him, and Corlos cried. After looking everywhere for his daughter, Corlos went around his golden castle and touched every piece of gold he found, turning it into dust as he could stand its shine no longer. The last thing Corlos touched and turned to dust was the giant golden statue he had built of himself. The only two things Corlos did not dare touch were his wife and his servant turned to gold, forever screaming in golden silence of Corlos' folly. Now Corlos was truly left with merely his life. King Corlos X disappeared from his kingdom that day, never to be reunited with his daughter. There was a moment of silence after Circe finished the tale. Tywine looked at her as if transfixed before speaking after a second. Just now you truly reminded me of your mother, Circe. You have even used her exact words. Will you do me the favor of telling your children this story in exactly this way to your children when they are old enough to hear it? Circe could feel the tears stinging in eyes at her father's words. Tywine almost looked vulnerable as Circe nodded in promise to his request, finding herself unable to answer with words. Can you tell me, daughter, what you think the story means, and why it has been told to all the children of the main Lannister branch for more than 6,000 years, ever since Lan the Clever took this rock away from the Castellis? Circe startled at the revelation about something she had merely regarded as cautionary tale, before pondering the story through the eyes of a Lannister. Is it a metaphor for a bad famine? Does it mean that besides gold, we Lannisters need to watch out for our food stores, so in time of need our small folk don't abandon us and we lose our hold of our power despite our wealth? No, it is not a metaphor for a famine, Tywine said, not unkindly, though the story is framed in such a way that it is a conclusion people can draw from it. Let me tell you a truth and a story, so you may understand what significance the story of King Corlos X holds for us Lannisters. First, the truth: gold is not special, it is simply a good like any other. Its value is ultimately determined by its rarity, as gold in itself has no intrinsic use like produce or cloth. And now let me tell you a story. Do not interrupt me, even when my story surprises you. And it will. It is the story of Lord Corlos X Casterly, the last of the Castellis. Back in the Age of Heroes, when there were no roads through Westeros and 100 kings ruled the lands, the Castellis found the mountain with the biggest gold deposits in the entire world. Their family grew wealthy and plentiful because many kings came to their home to exchange their wares for gold, for kings and lords all loved the gold's luster. So great was the influence of the Castellis that they never had to leave their unassailable rock or keep up relations with any petty kings, as all kings clamored to remain in the Castellis' favor. It came the reign of Lord Corlos X. By then, the Castellis had grown complacent in their position of power and left the administration of their lands and their wealth to their branch families, the Casters, the Tellais and the Callis. But there was a second son of one of their branch families, Lancaster, who wanted more out of his life than just being the steward for another's wealth. He became a powerful and rich merchant, the first man from Westeros to trade all around the continent and even as far as Essos. And he fell in love with the only daughter. Lan was already rich and powerful by the time he was 20 and the Castellis saw him for what he was, the most skilled in the land in handling wealth. So Corlos X convinced Lan to become his steward by promising Lan the hand of his daughter. Lan toiled in the position of steward for 5 years, greatly increasing the Castellis coffers. When he approached Corlos again about the wedding between Corlos' daughter and Lan himself, Corlos. Circe looked up at Tywine as her father's voice seemed to break off for a second, surprised to see unbridled fury in his eyes. The moment passed in a heartbeat as Tywine continued. When Lan approached Corlos so that the Casterly would complete his side of their, Corlos said to him, "You are a mere caster, Lan. A servant. You are not fit to marry my daughter. Circe almost forgot to breathe as she Corlos' words. They were almost an exact fit to the insult Aes had delivered upon her father when Tywine had asked the king to betroth Circe and Rhaegar. Yet Tywine just spoke on, his jaw set in controlled rage. Lan was incensed, as is only natural at such an insult. He left the service of Corlos the same day and struck out on his own. He knew the other petty lords, Banefords, Crickehalls, Westerlings all had their own mines. So with his great wealth Lan bought an army and started his own mines. He had a stroke of fortune and stumbled upon the second best mines in the Westerlands. That is where Lan built his castle, and he named it Castamere, named for the insult that Corlos had thrown at his feet, the fact that he was a mere caster. Many people wondered why he did not give his castle a grander name, but there was a lot of wisdom in his choice. He was a low-born son in a world ruled by lords. You, Circe, will have to fight for your place in this world even harder than Lan had to. Just because you are a woman. Never forget what you are, for surely the world will not. Make it your strength. Then it can never be your weakness. Armor yourself in it, and it will never be used to hurt you. And you are more than just any woman, Circe, you are my daughter. I will see you triumph in this world of men, for you and Jamie are my legacy. And you alone, Circe, can take on Joanna's legacy. So from now on I will teach you personally all that the Lannister legacy entails, and how you defend and increase it best. But let us return to our story first. In Castamere Lan found a great abundance of gold and silver. Of course, the gold vein wasn't nearly as big as the one below Casterly Rock, but on the other hand, there is nothing else but gold below Casterly Rock. Still, the resources Lan found in Castamere were instrumental in the plan that earned Lan his moniker. You see, as Casterly Rock's steward, Lan was in charge of welcoming trade envoys from all over Westeros. He knew all the passes envoys used to cross the mountains. So Lan posted men along all the ways leading towards Casterly Rock that would exchange gold to the incoming envoys against whatever they brought, and at better rates than the Casterlis. Lan also went on to spread a huge amount of gold amongst the small folk under the direct rule of the Lannisters. So much that all the farmers and craftsmen around Casterly Rock had more gold than they ever needed. And so, through Lan's clever schemes, in the lands around Casterly Rock, gold ceased to be a rarity even amongst the poorest beggars. But as the value of a good is determined by its necessity and its rarity, the small folk soon realized that to them gold was practically worthless. Yes, the gold was pretty, but everyone had pretty golden nuggets, and none of the small folk wanted to exchange their products of labor for gold anymore, be the product the food a farmer brings in or the sword a blacksmith made. There just wasn't anyone around that would take the gold of their hands again, as everyone had it in abundance. Something like that had never happened before, and has not happened since. In a short period of time, Lan managed to make gold practically worthless in a small area. And all the gold that Corlos X had could not buy him a loaf of bread or a piece of clothing, while Lan happily loaned the small folk more gold to pay their taxes to the Casterlis. At the same time, Lan introduced silver as the replacement currency for gold. After all, he had an abundance of both metals in Castamere, whereas the Casterlis sat on their pile of gold, starving and threadbare. It took less than a year, for Lancaster to outright buy Casterly Rock from Corlos X Casterly in exchange for Castamere with its silver mines. The other thing Lan demanded from Corlos was the hand of Corlos' daughter, which the last Lord Casterly could not refuse anymore. It took 2 decades for Lan to reclaim all the gold he had given away to the small folk, but his taxes were overall more generous than those of the Casterlis had been. In his lifetime Lan laid the foundation of Lannisport to actively dominate and control the gold trade in Westeros, so no one could ever use the same trick against Lan that he had used to swindle the Casterlis out of their castle. Already 5 years after Lan had taken the rock, he bribed a contingent of Casterly servants in Castamere to poison Lord Corlos and his army before his own troops took over and eradicated every trace that was left of the Casterlis on this world, aside from his wife. At the end of his life, Lan changed the name of his family to Lannister to sever the last connection that could remind anyone of his former status as a servant to another. With the years, Castamere became the Castamere of the reigns, and subsequent generations of Lannisters shrouded Lan's actual taking of the rock in legend and tall tales for children. Ever since Lan took the rock for us have the Lannisters reigned supreme in the Westerlands. Today the Lannisters have mined Casterly Rock for around 7 millennia, amassing the greatest quantity of gold in all of Planetos. At a conservative estimate, by weight alone, we Lannisters store at least 7/10 of all the gold ever mined in the known world in the vaults beneath the rock, and we store another 20th in banks from Old Town to As High. It is our foremost interest as a dynasty to forever keep the world's supply of gold at a level that leaves it the most precious metal for currencies everywhere. This will allow us to retain the ability to control any economy anywhere in the world at our convenience. By the time Tywin finished talking, Circe had been shocked into silence for several minutes already. It took a little longer still to find her voice again and ask her father the all-important question on her mind, even if the words came out shaky and trembling. "But why are you telling me all this now, father?" "Because, daughter, instead of merely marrying you to a mad tyrant to secure a crown, I have struck bargain with the Starks, the Arryns, the Greyjoys, the Baratheons and possibly the Martells to destroy the dragons on the Iron Throne and again redraw the borders of Westeros, leaving us to once again rule as kings of the Rock over the Westerlands and large parts of the Reach and the Riverlands. And seeing that Jaime is either a hostage of our enemies or compromised through his developing relationship with the Queen, you may consider yourself heiress presumptive of the Lion Crown, to assume the mantle of queenship after I have passed and rule as my successor. For that reason, I will assume the role of your teacher in matters of rule, power and finance. I will see you become worthy of the legacy you will take on. And I will see the Rock ruled by a true Lannister, not a Dragon Knight in disguise. Cersei did not know what to think. It took her a second to realize she was gaping at her father, an affliction she quickly remedied. Gaping. Horrible. She had not done that since before her mother had died. And now she was rambling in her head, just great. Then euphoria hit, as Cersei understood. Before, she'd been a pawn. Truly. She had been supposed to marry well and secure an alliance, and leave her family and her name behind. Now she had become more. The pawn had turned into a queen, had turned into a player herself. She would not have to leave the Rock upon marriage, but rule it supreme in her own right. Has Aunt Jenna ever seen this room? Cersei asked, breathless. Her father shook his head in denial. Has Jaime? Another shake in answer, and a flash of a grimace on Tywin's face. Cersei was not sure if she felt elation or despondency. Why is there a skeleton next to you? It had seemed so inconsequential from all these revelations, Cersei almost had not cared. But she knew, Tywin always had a purpose for the things he kept around him. That, her father answered her, is Errol Hunnitung. The name sounded familiar, yet it took Cersei a second to place it. The singer, she asked, the one, you know father, the one who, Cersei faltered before she finished her sentence. Yes, Tywin finished for her, the singer who started the saying us Lannisters shit gold. I was going to let it slide after banning him from the Red Keep and the Westerland, yet he kept walking around spreading the tale. The joke was gaining too much traction with the small folk, so I had him taken. Tywin looked at the pile of bones next to him, disdain clear on his face before he continued talking. He would have lived if he had simply shut up. But he did not, so I took him down here and left him to starve in this golden cage. The only thing he was given was cow manure. He died when he grew hungry enough to eat it and died over days from the diseases the shit contained. For all the gold around Errol, I had made cow shit more valuable to him than all the gold combined, only because it allowed him to live longer than if he ate nothing. This is lesson 1 for you, Cersei. For us, gold is practically worthless. The second lesson relates to your grandfather. My father Tytos understood the first lesson well enough. However, it was the only thing he retained about gold, that it was worthless to him. He had more than almost the rest of the world combined, after all. That is why he always forgave our bannermen when they defaulted on their loans. Why he left the Tarbeckhor and the Rain brothers to run roughshod throughout his reign. After all, even if they mocked him, he could do the same. All his lords were fools for something as worthless as gold. This is lesson 2 for you, Cersei. For everyone beside us, there is nothing of greater worth than gold. Use this knowledge, and you will always have an angle with which to control them. And as Tywin saw his daughter soak up his teachings like a sponge, he felt something akin to pride. He knew now was the time for practical education. Well, the lesson he was going to teach Cersei was actually a theoretical thought exercise by his forefathers, but Tywin was now going to make it a reality. Cersei, when do you think civil war will erupt in Westeros? Cersei looked at her father, pondering, before she answered. Skirmishes might happen earlier, as opposing patrols chance upon another, but I doubt open warfare will start soon. The lords of the realm are in the unique position that they know war is unavoidable and coming soon, so everyone will stockpile arms and train their men to increase their chances to come out on top of the chaos to come. Tywin's eyes smirked at Cersei, even as his face did not. You've been listening to Tijet, haven't you, daughter? I did, Cersei smiled back, with just the right amount of practiced cheek. You did tell me he is better than you in manners of tactical warfare, so his opinion seemed the most sensible. He knows better how to lead men in battle, it is true, Tywin stated without an ounce of envy, simply assessing the fact, which is why I tend to leave him in command of my men when we fight, but Tijet is not as proficient in reading the strategic layout. The first uncertainty you must always remember is that the war may break out any day. Ares is mad enough to just push us over the brink any second, so every prediction for a time frame has to include our king as an uncertain fallacy. Bar the possibility that Ares does something stupid, war will not break out for a year, but then it will happen quickly. Think Battle of the Gullet. Circe looked at her father for a second, before her memory kicked in. Where Jaime had read tales of Knights of Valor, Circe had read battle reports before her father had forbidden the librarian from giving her the relevant books. The Battle of the Gullet, the most devastating naval battle in recorded history, fought in the Dance of the Dragons. Important because it marked the entry of foreign powers into the domestic affairs of the Seven Kingdoms, when the three daughters raised Spicetown and broke the power of the Valerius. You think, Circe slowly spoke as she answered, powers across the narrow sea will meddle, either to push their own interests or at the invitation of one of the sides in the war. I do not think so, Tywine said in a mirthless tone that yet contained mirth aplenty. I know so. For I myself already have set into motion the hiring of sellsword companies in Essos. I have been given intelligence on some of the movements of our allies. Rickard Stark has been preparing masterfully for a war of secession for over a decade. Rickard Stark. Both Aunt Jenna and Uncle Tijet had already talked of him. Tijet had spoken well of his skill and that of his men, yet he had been hesitant of the man's cunning and intent. Jenna on the other hand had praised his cunning. She'd also given plenty comments on the good looks the Starks seemed to breed, from their imposing builds to their stalking gait to their impeccable beards. A lot. Jenna had talked a lot of the Starks' looks. Circe could understand Jenna's roving eye with a husband like Imanfrey, but why did her aunt have to share her saucy fantasies with Circe? Circe did remember Brandon Stark well enough from Harrenhal. Probably every maid at the tourney did. The man was a vision. And that accent, a burr to break hearts. The highest family of the North definitely left deep impressions back then. And lasting ones, especially the now disgraced heir. A minor Lannister had birthed a grey-eyed girl 9 months after the prince first showed his inclination towards Lyanna Stark, and Circe knew of at least one noblewoman from the Reach that had caught the same affliction. A Fossoe. Yes, green-appled. Brandon Stark had not been shy with his attentions. That was not important now, though. Rebellion had been in the making for over a decade. Of course most people had seen the block forming between the North, the Riverlands and the Vale, along with the Stormlands, yet those 4 regions could not have hoped to beat the other 5 united. The goal must always have been for the Vale and the North to splinter off the 7 kingdoms, seeing how they could close the ways into their domains perfectly. What has Rickard Stark done in preparation for the war? Circe could not help ask. A lot, daughter. He will be a good ally. Yet I need you to be wary of the Starks. Rickard has given us a great opportunity, and the North will back you if you come to take power over the kingdom we will build ourselves. After all, his youngest son is to be your prince consort. Circe froze. She tried to remember the youngest Stark, Biron Stark. Brynden Stark. Something with B, and a name that was not Brandon, despite the apparent obsession the Starks had with that name. 7. Circe knew the boy had been at the tourney, yet all she could recall was faceless boy soaked in wine. Bernhard Stark. Well, it might be the name. Hopefully. Benjen Stark. He's a year younger than you. Raised in Rickard's house, not fostered out. Apparently wicked with a bow. And he will take on the Lannister name, when you two wed. Your children will be Lannisters, kings to rule for eternity come. A daughter of you and Benjen will have to marry a Northman and she will be given stewardship of Moat Cailin in the Stark's name. If she marries a cousin, a son of Prince Eddard, she'll even become Lady of the Keep, with her sons to assume the mantle of the Lord. Either way, our houses will be bound firmly for 2 generations. Circe tried to picture herself and her husband. She saw herself beside a younger Brandon Stark, younger but just as boisterous. She saw herself beside Rhaegar Targaryen, plucking his lute for her. She saw herself beside others, Robert Baratheon, Elbereth Arryn, Adam Marbrand. She saw herself beside Jaime, her mirror in this world. There was only one thing that never changed, no matter who she saw as her husband. Circe herself, resplendent on her throne of gold, her husband on a lower step beside her. Cersei always saw herself rule in her own, as a Lannister, and Cersei felt glorious. It did not matter, she recognized, who the man beside her was. A good match, was all Cersei said. Thank you, father. Tywin gave the nod of a man who never entertained the possibility of refusal, and who had never been proven wrong in that regard. Cersei knew she would master the same certainty herself. Good. We will talk of Rickard Stark's plans later. Let me first explain how we will channel Essos' influence away from the war in Westeros. Tell me, Cersei, which forces in Essos do you believe could have an impact on the Westeros war theatre, and which do you believe could not? Cersei took a second to think before answering. Any of the three daughters, probably. Yet their might has diminished since the time of the Triarchy. Separate as they are, they will not have any lasting gains. Slaving raids might increase. Pentos cannot employ an army. Bravos will have financial interest, yet their anti-slavery stance has them isolated in Essos, so fights across the narrow sea would be too much of a drain on their forces. Qohor and Norphos are landlocked, so their armies cannot move as easily. Lorath does not have the power. Lastly, Qarth and Ib are too far, and the Dothraki will never cross the waters. Volantis. Volantis will be the threat to stability. Tywin looked at her, a little astonished. Cersei knew her father had discouraged Cersei's interest in unladylike topics and interests, yet now her defiance must have been a welcome surprise for Tywin. Cersei allowed herself a small smile. That is an accurate evaluation, Tywin said, and Cersei felt her heart soar. At least, it would be if Essos conducted themselves in war just as we do. Which they do not. War is more of a mercurial nature across the narrow sea. It is not motivated by dynastic interests in power and dominion, but by mercantile notions of potential gains and losses. Every city-state may send insurgents or armies in their employ. Except Lorath or Pentos, you are right in your assessment of the two of them. Yet Pentos' magisters may employ private armies, as may the nobles of Volantis or of any of the daughters. The true threat, however, are the readily available sellsword companies and the purchasable slaves. Therefore, I have undertaken measures that will see Essos west of the Bone Mountains sink into chaos, bind the majority of all mercenary companies to the different warring parties, and see the slave trade in shambles. Already in Riverrun I set into motion a flood of blood and a storm of steel that will drown Essos for generations. They will never know who wrought it, but believe me when I tell you, I bought the war that will define the fault lines for the web of alliances and enmity dominating Essos for the next 5 centuries. Cersei could only look at her father as he spoke calmly of the death of millions like it was a discussion of the dinner menu, and she felt fear and awe and anticipation. One day, it would be Cersei who could decide the fate of the world. She'd always felt it her destiny. Now it had become certainty, for Tywin had never lied to his children. His truths always served her father more. How are you going to break Essos, father? What did you learn today, about the nature of gold, daughter? It is worthless to us, but there is nothing of more worth in the world to everyone else. Tywin remained silent, not disapproving, but looking at her to bring up something else. So Cersei did. Gold is a good, just like everything else that is being traded. Correct, daughter. Now, what determines the value of a good? Rarity and necessity. You've listened well, but there is a more apt term for it in the context of all goods. Supply and demand, Cersei. In Essos, the value of a person is determined not by blood, but by supply and demand. And because most of the supply of slaves comes from Slavers Bay, I have flooded Qarth and Volantis with gold as my first order, to empty Meereen, Astapa and Yunkai of all their produce. Cersei heard the words, but she did not understand. Her father looked at her and continued, seeing the question in Cersei's eyes. In Slavers Bay there is the greatest supply of slaves on the market, making the price of a slave purchased there cheaper than anywhere else. Yet all clients that go Slavers Bay to purchase their slaves have to pass through either Volantis or Qarth. Slaves are available in those places, too, yet they are naturally more expensive than in the cities of the Harpy. This is because the slave merchants incur costs in bringing slaves over to either Qarth or Volantis, and those merchants want to drive a profit. I will pay gold well above the market price for ships, for spices, for luxury goods and for real estate in both cities. Those goods I will bring here in part, but the majority will simply be destroyed. The goal is not the exchange of gold for other objects of value, but the devaluation of gold. Therefore, the corresponding objects of value will have to disappear, because it means an increase in the amount of gold entering the markets without while trade goods of corresponding value simply cease to be a factor. Now, this process will take time, and in this time the market price for slaves in both cities will fall. Let me explain. Without their ships, less people will make the journey from Volantis or Carthon to Slavers Bay. As a consequence, the markets there will suffer, forcing the slavers themselves to ship their slaves out of Slavers Bay if they want to make a profit. And as the slavers reach either Volantis or Carth, they will find many people a lot richer in gold than usual, in both of those cities. Additionally, the slavers will be able to demand a higher price and earn more money than in Slavers Bay, just because the standard market price in both of those cities is higher than in any of the cities of Slavers Bay. And the Volanten and Carthene that have suddenly found themselves in the possession of large amounts of gold will be very willing to buy the slaves the merchants bring. This is because there is now a greater amount of slaves in Volantis and Carth, and their prices will fall from the perspective of the clients. Not down to the level of Slavers Bay, of course. But the supply of slaves in Volantis and Carth will increase, naturally decreasing the amount a Volanten or Carthene pays for a slave. This will drive up demand, leading the slavers to continue supplying slaves to Carth and Volantis at an increased rate. The demand for slaves will not decrease, but I will get to that point later. Are you following my explanation thus far, Circe? Circe simply nodded, so Tywine continued talking. So, Slavers Bay is slowly being emptied of slaves, to be sold in either Carth or Volantis. Carth will continue trading with the Far East, Yet and beyond, but that is a topic I will again go further into later. First, the second part of my plan. I will set the free cities on the warpath against the Dothraki. Why? Because they are a scourge that is universally despised. They only survive because it is generally cheaper to pay them off, than to fight them. We do not have that problem. A call will be sent out, from Qohor. For years now Qohor has been hounded by Akulzeko, who returns again and again to demand a tithe from the city. Again, I will pay above the usual amount of money for sellsword companies and slave legions to give battle to the Dothraki outside Qohor. While the Dothraki are feared, they pose more of a threat towards loose populations on open field. They are vulnerable against armored infantry because their blade of choice is designed to hunt down fleeing men on foot. They are vulnerable against bowmen and heavy cavalry because they are too stupid to wear armor. The biggest danger the Dothraki pose lies in their archers on horseback. Again, heavy cavalry, longbowmen and armored infantry. Too expensive for most people, but gold is irrelevant to us. Circe jumped in as Tywine trailed off. Her father looked his grim way of content and continued. Exactly. Now, slave legions will continue joining the fight from Volantis, because slaves there have become cheap. Meanwhile, a second host will set off from Sarth. The last Sarnori city carries the worst grudge against the Dothraki because they are responsible for the death of their empire. Together, I do not doubt that the Qohori and Sarthi host will have a problem destroying Kulzeko's host. With some of the ships we purchase we will organize for logistical support along the Sarn, so that the combined Sarth-Qohor host continues to push for V's Dothrak. The Sarthi will be easy to convince, and at least the slave companies will go along. Yet V's Dothrak is too important to the Dothraki as a people to allow such a challenge. I predict the Dosh-Kaline to pressure all remaining Khals to meet the Sarth-Qohor host on the field. That is exactly what we want. Because while the Sarthi carry the heaviest grudge against the Dothraki, their revenge is entirely irrelevant to us. There is another empire with a grudge against the Horsa Lords, yet their empire still stands. The Ebenes will prove far more potent a knife against the Dothraki. Their holdings on the Isozi mainland have been destroyed time and time again by different cults. Yet the distance between the forest of Ifakevron to the womb of the world is a lot shorter. So when a large portion or all of the Dothraki ride to meet the Sarth-Qohor host in the field, a third group comprised of sellsword will sail down from Ibesar to descend on V's Dothrak. There they will raise the Dothraki capital to the ground, salt the earth and scatter the ashes. It will not matter that the host from Sarth and Qohor will be destroyed by the Horsa Lords. When V's Dothrak is sundered, the Dothraki will go to war against all that participated in the fight against them. And with our gold we have ensured that people from all the free cities will take part in the Kohari host. In their impotent rage the Dothraki will strike out against all the free cities, for they will never reach it across the water. And after years of paying off the Dothraki, all 9 free cities will find that this time, they will have to fight. And for that purpose they will once again bind the scattered sellsword companies, leaving our enemies in West Eos without purchase among them. The sellsword companies follow the gold because, in difference to us, gold is of more worth than anything else to everyone in the world. Cersei whispered the answer as Tywine once more slowed in his talks, awed and scared at the scope of Tywine's actions to come. Cersei's father nodded approvingly, before he continued talking. Now, there is one more step to my plan of sinking Essos into chaos, and another of limiting the spread of the carnage. I will get the Tigers elected in Volantis and set them on a warpath, and I will get Karth to close the Jade Gates, keeping the nations of the Far East out of the thick of the fighting. First, the Tigers. Nothing, Cersei, nothing is surer of getting all the free cities up in arms and making alliances with each other than the first daughter hungry for conquest once again. There are 2 more goods we will trade in Volantis. We will sell arms for cheap, and we will buy food for all prices. The arms will be welcome in arming the slave companies, yet not all of the weapons will leave the cities. As won't the slaves, for Yunkai and Meereen trade mainly in slaves that make less than adequate fighters. So the amount of slaves will rise, as will the amount of slaves per freedman. I can guarantee that a slave rebellion will already be in the works in Volantis. We just have to remove the limiting factors and provide the means and incentives to fight for the poor and destitute. It will take some time, but Volantis will be swamped in slaves and arms in time. Plus, we will control the majority of the food supply. We simply have to destroy that food supply ourselves and find ourselves a scapegoat. It doesn't matter who that scapegoat is. What matters is that Volantis will be full of people that are poor, angry and, most importantly, hungry. They will take up arms themselves, and existing forces will take over to direct the storm of violence in the right direction. The only place where there is food left in the city, the larders of their masters in the old city. There will be anarchy in the street. And quite coincidentally the old blood's blood will be boiling from a series of assassinations targeting prominent Tigers. Some flimsy veiled connections between the assassinations and the major cities nearby will leave the Tigers with the nice opportunity to declare war on any of the other powers in Essos, provided they manage to win against both the slaves and the Dothraki without major losses. However, even if the old blood loses a few pounds of flesh, the other powers that be in Essos will see a Volantis on the brink of collapse, but still under the rule of the expansionists. I reckon Braavos or Teosh will be the ones to launch a preemptive strike in that case, to prevent Volantis from recovering under the Tigers. Whatever happens, we will help war come along. Finally, Karth. In Karth I will try a blueprint for the destabilization of a city-state that will work similarly if applied in, say, Braavos or Ib, if the need ever arises. I will set the merchants and the nobility against each other by strengthening one faction and starting a ruthless assassination campaign against the other. This time I intend to kill the purebloods that control the guard forces in the city, with the merchants as the obvious beneficiaries. It only takes one pureblood stupid or angry enough to lash out at the obvious targets to bring the whole house tumbling down. If it all works out there will be open fighting in the streets, and Karth will close itself off from the world, as they are virtually unassailable from without. That will provide the added benefit of keeping any ambitious god emperors from UT on the other side of the very much closed Jade Gate. To ever achieve a similar effect in Braavos, I'd probably kill the key holders. In Ib it'd be the members of the Shadow Council. I am not even sure who I would set against the Shadow Council. Maybe the Whaler Guild. Something to ponder if it ever becomes an issue. I don't believe we'll be needed to stir the pot anymore after Volantis anyways. Now, do you have any questions, Cersei? Cersei just sat there, trying to comprehend all that she had been told. It all made sense, in a logical sense, yet at the same time, it was so unreal. So much chaos, so much power. It was difficult to think of a question when such a vivid vision of the future was laid out before her, and yet. Father, Cersei finally asked, a little hesitant, won't the decrease in the value of gold hurt the rest of our stores? And what do we do if the events in Essos don't develop as you predict? Good questions, daughter, Tywine said, nodding approvingly, but easy to answer. Yes, the value of gold will decrease, but we almost won't notice it here. The two key steps in pumping money into the two cities are the speed of the influx of gold and the restriction of travel for the populace. We want there to be too much gold concentrated in one place, leading to economic collapse. When the dust has settled and the gold spreads out from Volantis and Carth, the value of gold will balance out again. It is likely that the Carthine will take their gold further east, as Yeti will still value gold highly, and on the other side of Carth is, well, Volantis. As the Volantens spend their new gold on sellsword companies and the war, the gold will be disseminated all over Essos. The loss in value we will feel here in West Eos will be negligible. And, after all, gold to us is irrelevant, Circia finished once more. Exactly, Tywine said. As for your second question, things won't develop the way I tell you. There are smart players in Essos just as there are here in West Eos. Some will reveal themselves that I don't even know existed. I have no insight into the dealings of Norphos, and the religious aspects of the war in Essos are impossible for me to predict. I am not even certain what will happen here in West Eos, and that is just accounting for the Church of the Seven. I will have to talk with Jenna about that, and I expect you to come with me then. Elation. Satisfaction. Pride. There was no other feeling Circia had ever felt as pronounced. Yet one question remained stuck in Circia's head. Something that almost left her feeling a little empty. Father. Does all our power come from our money? No, Circia. Power has many facets. Money is power. Knowledge is power. A name carries power. Sometimes, power is just power. It's where men believe it lies. And it's where men are confronted with it. Tywine almost wore a grin as he continued on, his face taking on sardonic lines. Just do not make the mistake of projecting illusions onto power. It isn't good, or bad. It does not provide opportunity, only a divide between the strong and the weak. Opportunity only exists when power is uncertain. When there is chaos. Which is why Essos will really tear itself apart. Because they will see the chaos around them as power for the taking. They will fight for it. They will die for it. For some, chaos will be a pit they fall into. For others, chaos will be a ladder to climb. But for most, chaos is like power. Simple. Chaos is chaos. Notes. If you've seen this chapter when it was first posted and now think. Wait, what? Wasn't this chapter a lot longer? Like, 15.000 words longer and 5 other POVs, plus a diary entry by Victorian. Also, didn't it go by another name, Chaos? Then you are correct, yes it was and yes it did. However, I've taken Lindsay 28's advice after some deliberation and split Chaos into 4 parts. I even split the end notes to make all of it more easily digestible. I've elaborated on the why in the first of these chapters. Lastly, I've altered the preface sentence slightly to make it better. Now the important parts. Economics. No, I do not claim Tywine's scenario to be 100% foolproof. In fact, it would probably go horribly wrong. His share of the world's gold supply is ridiculous here. But I've seen too many fics that went with the mines drying up. There's not a single piece of evidence, not even a hint pointing to that conclusion in the books. So here you've got a 180. And bullshit economics. But hey. Just roll with it. Like Ricard. Rolling with Ricard in a roll. Preview. The next chapter is either from Ashura's or Brandon's POV and will return to the day after the feast outside Riverrun. It will end the first phase of the story where I let quite a few balls loose in a china shop. I've decided, at the height of my boundless creativity, to call this phase the ignition phase, laying down some fault lines for the war ahead. After comes the consolidation phase, where you will see the major powers clean house and get their unruly bannermen behind them. Yep, Riswells are coming up. Ricard will be pissed. Look forward to it. So long, your Ricard in a roll impeccable beard. Chapter 22, The Crypt is their place. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The sun shone brightly on Brandon's face, and it felt like centipedes were chewing through his brain. The rank, rancid smell of vomit hit Brandon like a punch in the lung. It was the smell of his own vomit, Brandon realized. Someone had propped Brandon's back up against the frame of his bed. He must have fallen out of it sometime in the night, for Brandon hazily remembered his father tucking him in like a child. It had felt good, the drinking and the crying. Cathartic. It had been a long time since he had last cried like that. Someone knocked, the sound of bone on wood sending jolts of pain through Brandon's head. His eyes felt as if they might burst, and all the colors around looked more muted and more vibrant at the same time. "Gods, you look like shit, brother," said Ned from the doorway. Great, of course it had to be Ned that came to Brandon in the morning. Brandon did not have the patience to listen to his lucky little brother, not today. "Piss off, will ya? Go fuck your Dornish cunt and leave me be." Brandon realized he should not have said that when he felt his headache exploding, courtesy of Eddard's fist. Brandon's brother did not even say anything, but his eyes turned hard as steel. Eddard simply stepped up to the curtains and yanked them open. The sun was blinding. "Gods, give me a cloud," Brandon wanted to shout. "Sorry." The apology came from himself, Brandon noticed. It sounded hollow. Eddard did not look very accepting, though he did settle on a chair across from Brandon. "You're even drunker than that day at Harrenhal. At least you were coherent enough to speak and put up a fight back then. Do not go cussing Shura again, ever. Next time it will not end for you with just a broken nose and a dislocated jaw. Am I clear, Brandon?" Eddard's threat was again spoken in that factual, almost bored tone. It sounded like an oft-repeated platitude from Eddard's mouth, not like the promise of violence that it was. Brandon's brother could be terrifying. "I understand," was all that Brandon could answer. "Great that we're clear on that. Don't bother coming for breakfast, I think it better you wait until I'm done. I don't think I can stand the sight of you right now, Brandon." Emotionless, that was what Eddard sounded like. Brandon hated it. This Eddard did not seem like the Ned Brandon had built snow forts with and who used to go looking with Brandon for direwolf pups in the Wolf's Wood. And Brandon knew there was only one thing he could do that might set them straight again. Or it might catch him another fist. You never knew with the truth. "Wait, Ned. I'm not." Brandon faltered as he spoke, but Ned did stop on the doorstep. This was the only way they would ever be brothers again. "I am not as drunk as that day at Harrenhal. The truth is I cannot even remember most of the tourney, and the day Ashura came to my tent I had drunken way more than I could handle and—" "Don't," Ned growled. "No," Ned snarled, "do not make excuses for that day. And especially no excuse as pathetic as a drunken mistake. If you do, I think I will start to hate you, Brandon." There was fire now in Eddard's eyes, burning with cold purpose and a wolf's rage. His brother had it, Brandon saw. Eddard had the wolf's blood, and it had been forged into a weapon. "I have never been more low than during that blasted tourney. That day I assaulted Ashura because I was jealous of you, and the drink had robbed me of sense." Eddard looked at him, and Brandon saw a Lord Paramount that someday would make Boltons and Umbers cower. But Ned did not leave. "Explain." "When our party left Winterfell for Harrenhal, we collected my foster brother Willem outside Barrowton. I'd never seen Willem happier, Ned. Willem told me his father had arranged Willem's marriage to Barbary Riswell." Brandon swallowed, yet his throat remained parched. "And I have loved Barbary as long as I can remember. Did you know, Ned, I once begged father to break my betrothal with Caitlin Tully. I fell to my knees in front of father and I cried my eyes out when he denied me. When we made it to Harrenhal, to the tourney of all tourneys, I drank and fought and fucked to forget it all. And sometimes it worked." Brandon looked up into Ned's eyes again, still as unrelenting as steel. And Brandon could not censor the scorn his look carried himself. "That's where we met you again, Ned, and from the second day you were so happy, so disgustingly happy, in love with the beautiful Ashura Dane, and she was in love with you. Gods, I despised you then." The steel turned to fog, and all that stared down at Brandon was pity. Brandon hated it, and he hated himself. "I was drunk when I went up to ask the lady to dance with you. I did not turn sober once during that entire tourney. Have you ever been so wasted that you felt a spectator in your own body? When you seem sober outside, but the truth is that someone else has taken your body. Someone else that's still you, just without inhibitions and guided only by emotions and whims. Ned snorted at that. Robert Baratheon is my foster brother. I do not overindulge, but I've seen every type of drunk there is. Brandon felt a sardonic smile tugging his lips, but he squashed it before it became visible. He would make Ned angry enough in a second. He'd make Eddard very, very angry. Well, that was me the majority of the tournament, Ned. I fucked more than 20 women in the 10 days we were at Harrenhal. 23, to be exact. Then Ashura came looking for you, a day after I'd dropped out from the joust. I was drunk, I was that somebody else, and I was angry. So fucking angry. Did Ashura ever tell you what happened in that tent? Eddard's jaw tensed and his gaze was cutting, but Brandon braced himself and recounted the day, losing himself in the memory. Brandon had taken a woman from a minor Fosso branch to bed the day earlier. He didn't quite remember whether the wench was a red apple or a green apple Fosso, but when she left, her apple bottom had turned a scarlet red. Brandon had barely chased the woman out an hour ago when Ashura Dane cautiously entered his tent, asking after his brother Ned. Lord Brandon, he'd heard his name from outside. Ashura Dane here. Do you know where Ned is? At the Arryn camp. His friend Robert is terribly hungover after out drinking first Richard Lunmouth and Kyle Royce after. You know him, Ned cares. He'll be back here soon, why don't you wait with me? The tent flap opened, and the stunner Ned had wooed at the opening banquet entered. Ashura Dane had a serene look to her, she was obviously overjoyed. Her smile wasn't all that big, showing only the barest hint of pearl-white teeth, yet her dimples were more pronounced for it than if she had worn a huge grin. The girl looked half dreaming, and her movements had an unconscious flow to them. Laughing purple eyes Ned had waxed about her, and Brandon could see it well. Her eyes matched her dress, a silken gown with batik swirls of lilac, purple and lavender. Brandon had to admit the Dornish lady his brother fancied did not simply have beauty and grace, she also displayed good taste. Ashura Dane's layered dress accentuated her figure in a way that was seductive without being sultry, a fine balance to strike. Brandon gestured for one of the fur-covered hassocks that lined his tent and grabbed 2 cups and a pitcher of ale. The last of the wine he'd drunken 2 days ago, and now Brandon usually nursed his cup with a mixture of ale and grain brandy. It kept Brandon from thinking, so Brandon kept drinking. Thank you, Brandon's guest said as she took her ale, though she pulled a slight grimace as she sipped from her cup. Brandon lifted his own cup to hide a grin. Ashura Dane's drink was pure northern ale, but the taste was to be acquired. Ned's been talking of nothing but you the last few days, Lady Ashura. I hope you're not just stringing him along for his good looks, Brandon jested, more to fill the silence than for the need of conversation. Still, Ashura giggled at the jape. It did not sound melodious as some girls tried for, and a little deeper than the usual tone of her voice, but Ashura's laughter rang true. While Brandon had to admit that Ned did have a striking look when he put on his stern face and his lean frame drew just as many gazes as Brandon's muscular one, Ashura Dane just looked above anyone's league at the entire tourney. I really am thankful for pushing Ned into my arms at the opening day, Lord Brandon. I had not thought it possible to become so fond of another so easily, Ashura said while unsuccessfully trying to stifle her laugh, but fear not, I appreciate your brother for more than just his outward beauty. The confidence Ashura held while speaking showed she was aware of her own captivating charm, yet she did not appear arrogant. Brandon thought there'd probably been scores of bards singing to her beauty at the capital. And Brandon understood well, the easy comfort one could slide into with that one person. Barbary Dustin. Brandon quickly took a deep pull from his cup, and the burn in his throat chased the thought away. Still, the bitterness lingered. I believe you, it's something. Something real. So effortless, and more precious for it. Brandon heard himself speak the words, and he meant them. Yet, he had not meant to say them. Barbary and Willem. Ashura must have only noticed Brandon's speaking, for Brandon was sure his face did not match the light wistfulness of his words. Yes. Ashura almost shouted her agreement. That's it, that's exactly it. You Starks seem to know how to say what you mean. Brandon was glad at the distraction, and happy for his brother. Ashura Dane seemed to feel the same for Ned as Ned felt for Ashura Dane. A chuckle escaped Brandon as Ashura's eyes found his face again. Well, thank you, my lady. And please, do call me Brandon. It feels wrong, you calling me Lord Brandon when you are that close with my brother, Lady Ashura. Gladly, Brandon. But only if you call me Ashura in return. Ashura gifted Brandon a smile then, and it was warm and with almost sisterly fondness. It struck Brandon wrong, to get such a smile from her. To be liked because of Brandon's relation with Ned. Brandon could not help but wonder, shouldn't he be happier? Lionel always had basked in Barbari's sisterly affection. If Caitlin would ever show such a smile to Brandon's siblings. Ashura, then, he said, feeling hollow. Still, anything to keep talking, anything to keep from thinking. A short burn was on his throat, then Brandon remembered he had to refill his cup. Ned is definitely the more gifted with words between us two, everything he says sounds profound. But maybe that is because he talks so little. Ned. Ned was a good topic to remain on, so Brandon continued. Our father always used to say, you can reach everything, as long as you can bridge the gulf between intention and articulation. Well, from then on Ned only spoke in the profound. As for me, I don't think father wanted to give me advice on how to sweet-talk girls, but he did. Ashura laughed again, that slightly deeper laugh of hers. Brandon heard another, a throaty chuckle that was almost a rasp, but it was only a bittersweet memory he realized. Brandon's drink wasn't so bitter anymore, and his cup was empty again. A little more grain brandy in the next cup, and the ghost of a laugh disappeared. Oh, Ned can be quite the sweet talker, Brandon. And away from the crowds he isn't that quiet a wolf anymore. I'll even suffer that hateful tree in Harrenhal's Godswood just to hear him talking of the stars or his dreams or of us. At the last admission Brandon almost thought he saw Ashura blush, but surely Ned wasn't that sappy. Was he? Brandon just kept his eyes on the Dornish women, his own smirk stretching a little. Ashura Dane was definitely blushing. Well, the woman said hastily, as if embarrassed, do you fall into the same effortless fondness with your betrothed, Brandon? Brandon's face fell, at least from the reaction he saw on Ashura's face. Brandon did not particularly feel fondness for Caitlin Tully, and the feelings toward Caitlin Brandon felt effortless were anything but fond. Tell me, Ashura Brandon felt himself answer, or rather, felt his mouth move as he heard his own words, do you believe it possible to feel such fondness for your betrothed when that very betrothal keeps you from a beloved? Ashura Dane seemed reluctant to answer, Brandon noticed between sips, or at least weighing her words very carefully. I hope you can, with time. The words came hesitatingly when Ashura finally spoke, yet she did not stop there. And I hope never to find myself in such a position. Yet. There was a flash of pity in Ashura Dane's eyes as her words halted for a second. Yet I hope you know that women have less of a choice in their betrothals than men, Brandon. Would it not be worse to keep yourself from possibly growing fond of your betrothed because you blame her for something she has no control over? Brandon could not remember ever having felt more devoid of emotion. Ashura broke eye contact first, but still Brandon saw that damnable pity in her gaze. Brandon found his cup empty, as he found his flagon. As Brandon stood to get another, he slowly felt his feelings return, and stronger than ever. There was a restlessness to Brandon as he refilled his cup, and he noticed that it was almost pure brandy as he drank. Pity. How dare she pity him? How dare she pity him? Brandon turned around, yet he could not sit. Ashura Dane did not look comfortable sitting on the hassock anymore, yet she did not stand. Standing, Brandon was not comfortable doing that either. He walked a little, and that was better. Not good, but better. The liquid in his cup sloshed a little and spilled over, so Brandon drank to keep that from repeating. Brandon thought of Caitlin, and then of Barbary. Of Ashura and Ned, and of fondness, and Brandon walked and drank, and Ashura sat silent. Ashura Brandon said as Ashura flinched, Brandon's voice hoarse, your effortless fondness for Ned. The Lady Dane seemed to relax, and Brandon was not sure he liked that. What was he asking again? Brandon did not remember, but a question came to him. Have you ever felt it for another? No. Ashura Dane sat calmer as she answered, contemplating. There was a tender air about her, and again Brandon felt a discordant dissonance. Why was Ashura happy right then, sitting there? I've not felt the way I feel about Ned with anyone before. It's new. There was a sense of wonder to Ashura's words. Brandon understood her. He yearned for that. Why wasn't Brandon feeling that type of wonder anymore? Do you think you could ever feel the same with someone else? Brandon did not know where this question had come from, but he saw that Ashura seemed uncomfortable with the question again. Somehow, that did not feel wrong, so he did not mind where the question had come from. I do not know. Actually, I do not know if I wanted to, Brandon. Ashura faltered, and from that alone Brandon had to smile a little. It wasn't a nice smile, and Brandon had smiled nicely for many girls the last few days. I do not like my parents or my siblings the same way, yet I like them as much as each other. If Ned and I cannot, I hope to take a liking to important people in my life. Ashura's words were as much an answer as they were not. Some part of Brandon agreed with Ashura. Another part of Brandon simply screamed. Brandon took another sip, yet the screaming got louder in his head, instead. What about me? Ashura looked at him a little spooked, like a deer that had caught a wolf's scent. I do not understand. Brandon, what about you? Yes, you can like someone else differently. Brandon did not know what answer he wanted, but this answer was not it. No, Ashura. What did Brandon want? Could you like me as much as Ned? That was not really what Brandon wanted to ask, but then again, Brandon did not know what he wanted to ask. At least, Ashura looked anxious now, and Brandon liked that. Could you? Brandon asked as he stepped closer to Ashura, and the Dornish woman trembled a little. Brandon had to smile at that. Brandon lifted his cup once more, but it was empty. He turned to set the cup on the table. He had to, because Ashura was before him now, and the table behind him. When he looked back, Ashura seemed smaller. Please? Please what? Brandon said as Ashura shivered beneath him. Hadn't Brandon been in this position often, these days? A woman beneath him, looking up, saying please. Please don't. That was new, but maybe Ashura did not know better. Brandon had to say, she was beautiful. That dress so layered, so enticing. Why did Ashura not kiss him back? Why was Brandon kissing Ashura? The first layer came up from Ashura's dress, so that was why they were kissing. But she was not kissing back. Brandon's hand felt a shoulder strap, so he pulled it as he pressed down from above. Brandon's other hand found Ashura's breast, but she was not reacting to him. He grabbed a little tighter, and that drew a reaction. A whimper. The layers were getting in the way. Brandon gripped into the fabric and pulled, ripped. The dress tore, and Brandon felt Ashura flinch again beneath him. Brandon grabbed at it again, harder. Did he leave a mark? He was not sure. Why was he? There was a rip in Ashura's dress, and a tear in her eye, so Brandon lifted a hand to wipe it away. Ashura sniffled, cried, and turned her head away from his hand. Why did she turn away from Brandon's hand? Brandon felt angry. He tried to press down, but somehow Brandon did not feel too steady all of a sudden. Ashura seemed to notice, for she suddenly pushed him. Why did Ashura push him? Brandon stumbled backwards. Pain. All there was agonizing pain. Brandon crumbled down, the pain still there. Ashura had kneed him in the groin. Why had she? Ashura was gone, and the light from the tent flap was bright, and Brandon was on the floor and laughing and crying and screaming and... Ned entered the tent as in a rage. Brandon felt punches to his face, kicks to his body, and a last punch to his face. His nose broke, and first everything was blinding white from the pain before everything was suddenly. Brandon looked up at his brother as Brandon's gaze focused again. Ned was watching him through foggy grey eyes, through steel grey eyes, through foggy grey eyes. Ned remained quiet, but after a second, he came over from his chair and helped Brandon up onto the bed. Ned stayed quiet. I am sorry, Brandon said. Brandon felt small, then, but he meant what he said. Why did you not say anything, Brandon? Would it have helped anything? Brandon chuckled mirthlessly. If you'd told me at the tourney about Barbary, I'd have helped you. You're my big brother. A small sting returned, a sting of scorn. Yet Brandon kept from scoffing. Ned seemed to notice nonetheless. I know grief, brother. I helped Robert when his parents died. Well, drinks and women helped. So, at the tourney you would have had me, Robert, drinks and women. I also would not have been as disgusted with you for over a year, Bran. Brandon felt the tears in his eyes. Why now? Had it really been that long? Ned had not called him Bran since the tourney. I am your brother. You can tell me everything. You know, I'd probably grow into a catatonic chunk of ice if Shura was lost to me. Family is there to catch us when we fall. I'll need you and Father and Leia and Ben to keep me